Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to this edition of the Public Accountability Meeting. We'll start by doing introductions. So I'm Will Naylor, Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner for North Yorkshire, and to my left.
Phil Kane, Deputy Chief Constable, North Yorkshire Police.
Good afternoon, Fraser Sampson, Interim CEO.
Hello, Kieran Irvin, Temporary Assistant Chief Constable for Local Policing.
Claire Griffiths, Chief of Staff.
Assistant Chief Constable Amanda Oliver.
Leanne McConnell, Head of Criminal Justice.
JD Brigham, Commissioner of Parishes and PFCC.
Jez Rushworth, Chief Fire Officer.
Hello, Lisa Winwood, Chief Constable.
Hi everyone, thank you very much for coming. Jez, thank you very much for coming. Your first time here. You're not involved per se, but observing, and then maybe involved in future discussions. In terms of apologies, we've got Michael Porter, John McFall, Maria Earls, Rob Bowles. I haven't had formal apologies for, but he's not here, so I'll give his apologies. And I'm standing in, obviously, for Julia, who is in London giving evidence to the House of Lords Committee on Rural something, crime or economy, rural economy, I think. Otherwise, we'd be here, obviously. Item number 2, minutes of the previous meeting. I don't think they were sent out with the papers for those in the room. They are on the website, I believe, but I've got paper copies on the desk here. As is always the case with PAM, there isn't much to look at because we just put links into the videos that is on our website. So I don't think anyone will have any feedback, but if they do, please speak up now. No. Also not circulated is the action log, of which there are only 2, both of which will remain open, one of which is to bring an item back to this meeting on the policing operation Kirby Misperton, which is still due to come. Amanda, I believe. We don't have a date attached yet, but it's,
no, we don't,
it's coming.
Yeah, we're meeting directly after this meeting just to agree what that format will be like, and we'll be probably to the next one after.
Okay, great. And then the other one, which I think is attached to you, is something to take out of the meeting, which is a meeting with yourself and the Commissioner about Operation Active Leaf and lessons learned from that.
Yeah, so as soon as the multi-agency review is completed, I'll book some time in with the Commissioner.
Okay, can we leave both of those open then, as actions? Thank you. Item 3 is questions from the public. So I don't think we've had any formal questions, Simon, but this morning there was lots of feedback following North Yorkshire Police communications on child sexual exploitation, which has got various amounts of coverage in on the social media channels and I think in the media more generally now. So in response to that, I'll read out the statement Julia has put out this morning, and then I'll hand over to the Chief to give her version of events. So Julia said this morning, this campaign was not appropriate and North Yorkshire Police have made the correct decision to stop it and remove existing posts. I've asked the Chief Constable to ensure greater care is taken on the messages issued on behalf of the force in the future. Child sexual exploitation is a hugely important issue and we need to help victims, encourage them to speak out and get the support they need. There are many examples of good practice in North Yorkshire and I am disappointed with this campaign and the way in which the police chose to highlight it.
Thank you, Will. Yes, Julia and I have been in touch this morning in respect of this campaign. The first thing I'd like to say is child sexual exploitation is of huge importance and we need to ensure that we do connect with those people who are vulnerable in our society. We work very hard as an organisation alongside our corporate communications team to ensure that the right messages are reaching the right audiences so that we can keep people safe. On this particular occasion, we clearly got it wrong in respect of reaching some of those audiences and the way that message was received, and I apologise for that. And we have withdrawn the campaign for that reason and are re-engaging with some of our communities to see how we can better reach those communities that we need to speak to and to speak to those people who we want to protect from child sexual exploitation. And I thank the public for bringing this to our attention because we need to listen to what the public have got to say and how they receive our messages, and hopefully we will be able to support those who are most vulnerable in our society through clearer messaging, through liaison with the public going forward with this campaign.
Thank you, Lucy, appreciate it. So I hope, whilst there were lots of sort of informal questions on that note, I hope those statements have responded to those, but of course members of the public are more than welcome to keep asking those and we'll respond in due course on various behalves. Simon, there weren't any other on victims thematic specifically? No. Okay. Members of the public, of course, welcome to ask questions through the meeting, so we can pick those up at the end, item 6. But in the meantime, we can get on with the bulk of the meeting, which is our thematic. This month is victims. Who was going first, Jenny or Leanne?
Leanne first, yeah.
Leanne takes the honour. Great, fantastic. Thanks, Leanne.
Okay. So, thanks, Chair. So basically, I was asked to bring here today an outline of what North Yorkshire Police is doing to comply with the Victim Code. What I thought would be useful, first of all, would be to actually outline what the Victim Code is, because we hear a lot about it, but I'm not sure whether or not it's widely publicised in terms of the detail. So there's a few slides to detail what it is, what the entitlements are, and then that follows with a number of other inputs in terms of what North Yorkshire Police are doing.
I suspect it's one of those many things that the public don't really know about until they need to know about it, and then it becomes quite important. But yeah, that would be great to give us a bit of info.
Okay, right, lovely. Okay, so what is it? As you can see on the side there, it sets out the minimum standards of services that must be provided to victims of crime by organisations in England and Wales under the Domestic Crime and the Victims Act 2004. It's been in for a long time now, 2006. It's been updated a few times since then, but the last update is 2015. However, the latest government strategy has embarked upon another review of that, if you like, and there would be certain aspects of that that's been worked on, but we know from a early sight of communications from our police leads that there will be further accountability in relation to Victim Code, which is good, but we've yet to see how that materialises fully, but there's certainly quite a large focus on victim person statements, which I'll come on to shortly. Okay, so the commitments, there are a range of organisations that have to comply with the code. It isn't just police. There are all of the main partners that you would expect in terms of the criminal justice process, but it does go much further reaching than that in terms of Criminal Cases Review Commission, Revenue and Customs, the IOPC, Health and Safety Executive, parole boards, you know, as well as all the sort of CPS, your police, the witness care units, which are a statutory partnership under the code at the moment, PCC. So everybody that you can think of in relation to involvement in victims has, as a statutory body, has got responsibilities. And it is a statutory body, the legislation, so it's a requirement. So this is not something that agencies can take lightly, really. And what the code does is it brings together all of those agencies in terms of how we need to work and interact with each other. Going the wrong way. Okay, so according to the code, that is the definition of a victim. So I'll read it out, and it's on there to see: a natural person who has suffered harm, including physical, mental or emotional harm or economic loss, which was directly caused by a criminal offence. A close relative of a person whose death was directly caused by a criminal offence, and a close relative is defined as the spouse or the partner, and the relatives in a direct line, the siblings and the dependents of the victim. So that's a bit further than probably what people might actually ordinarily deem to be a victim, but there is also a further additional discretionary decision where other family members can be included, such as guardians or carers.
But, Jenny, I suspect you'll come on to later, it doesn't account for victims of ASB,
No.
nor people who die from non-criminal acts, potentially.
No. The legislation just covers this.
Do we try and extend any of those things sort of voluntarily, or within common sense, as it were? So something really, some, as we know, ASB can affect people as deeply as lots of crime can, and try and provide that same level of attention to detail and keeping those victims up to date.
I think it will probably be covered in Jenny's section, but I think we do try and expand where we can and apply some pragmatic criteria to it. But obviously there are some limitations in that, but I'm sure Jenny will cover that.
From a services to support cope and recovery perspective, we try and go as widely as we possibly can. However, we're limited in terms of what we have from a resourcing perspective to be able to achieve that, and we have to make sure we prioritise victims of crime. But the more we can do for individuals, particularly where specific cases raised and we want to be able to support, we'll go above and beyond what we offer.
Great.
Okay, so keep going the wrong way, sorry. Okay, so who's it for? Again, I think people the public may think that it's just a direct victim of crime, but it's actually a bit wider than that. So clearly direct victims of crime, and that's all crime, but also businesses that are victims of crime, because I think sometimes maybe businesses aren't necessarily seen as somebody who could be impacted by crime, generally for the purposes of this code. Parents and guardians of victims under 18 years old, bereaved close relatives, family spokesperson, they're bereaved, and other spokesperson, someone that can't represent themselves or is badly injured, so hopefully that speaks for itself really. Yeah. Okay, so what the code does is it outlines a whole list of statutory entitlements. I've picked out some of the key ones there really. What I haven't been able to do is cover here all of the different agencies' responsibilities under the code. So I've kind of picked out really the ones that mainly apply to ourselves and summarise them. So going down the list, every victim is entitled to a written acknowledgement and also to be told about the brief details that they have reported of that crime in writing. And that is largely undertaken through our process that we have with our crime recording function, but also our officers in terms of the contact agreement, which I'll come on to a bit later.
Is that old-fashioned letter, or are we in the 21st century?
No, well, it's probably a bit of both, because everybody is linked up to IT or email, so we have to cater for everybody.
Of course.
So I'll come on to that, but our contact agreement will largely cover that and where we are with our mobile data. Okay, so we also, they need to be informed about the code, and there are a number of ways that we inform victims about the code, including a Victim of Information Crimes booklet, which again I'll come on to, and also a contact agreement. There are links on our websites, and the Supporting Victims website as well, to the code, and there are various other links electronically available that we will signpost victims to at various points in the journey. So, but from the outset, they should be told about the code and what their entitlements are. Okay. They are entitled to receive access to services under the code, and that will be covered by Jenny through our supporting teams process. And that is regardless of whether somebody's been charged with a crime or with an offence, basically. There are certain types of crime that require specific consent, but again, I'm sure Jen will cover parts of that, or I can, if you like. Okay, so there are other special measures where applicable. Now, special measure, I go into that in some detail again, but that will, there are a range of different types of measures that can help, extra help for witnesses and victims when they're giving evidence in court. And that will be based around individual need, following an assessment that's undertaken. And certain types of victims are entitled to certain automatic special measures, and I'll come on to that shortly. They're entitled to make a victim personal statement, which is an offer that the police should make, and other agencies. And it's a way to give the victim a voice in terms of outlining to the judicial process, if you like, the impacts that a crime has had on them or their family.
Are we going to go into all of these in detail, Leanne? So there are questions, all of those, about how much is it done, how quickly, how well, how many victim personal statements do we manage to...
I come on, so I've got a section on VPS anticipating that, There is victims are entitled to be told about schemes in terms of restorative justice, to be able to take part in that where the agencies have schemes in place, and that's something that again will be covered through Jenny. They can seek a review on the decision not to prosecute, and that's something called the victim's right to review. That is undertaken largely either through the police or the CPS, depending on what stage the case is at. For the police element, in order for somebody to qualify for a victim right to review, we have to have identified a suspect, and we have to have interviewed them and then given a decision not to proceed. Okay, so we have an independent detective inspector in the CJ department who is the fourth SPOC in relation to victims' right to review, and they will receive requests from the public, obviously from victims who aren't happy with the outcome, and they will undertake an independent review of that case, and they have the ability to overturn the decision if that is within our statutory power. If not, we have to take that forward to the CPS and place our case in CPS.
Is that covered yet?
Not so much that in so much detail.
So on that note then, first of all, for members of the public who might find themselves in that position, do they get told about the right to review, like you would at the end of a complaint? You can appeal this, you can review that.
So that is detailed within our information of victims' crime booklet. They should be informed about it. But again, as with everything with the victim code, there are many facets to it, and we've undertaken, which I will come on to, there is a survey, in fact there's a national survey, and what sometimes victims at the time remember being told about might not come to the forefront of their mind, if that makes sense.
Access to the sort of information.
Access to information. So it is detailed. It's on our website. There is a page around what victim's right to review is and how to go about it.
Is it part of an officer's then sort of a template if they go and say to a victim, look, for these reasons we're not taking your case forward, but you can review that if you like by this mechanism? Is it done in that respect?
I don't think there's necessarily a template. We do put it on our letters. There's a one-liner.
Is it verbally communicated when the decision is? Yeah, it should be.
It should be verbally communicated, yes.
Right.
And it depends on where the decision is made as to how that's communicated as well, and whether or not CPS then take part in that.
Sure.
And there are different procedures for different agencies in terms of how that right to review can be taken forward.
And you might have this information, Tally, and if you don't, that's fine. But afterwards, at some point afterwards, would be helpful. How many there are and how many are upheld. Yeah. I don't know what the right sort of number would be for that, because on the one hand you want to show that you can look at those things and take an independent decision that actually that wasn't right, but you also don't want to overturn loads, because that would imply that your decision making is not very good at the first point of call. Yeah.
I haven't got the stats off my hand, but I do know from a police perspective they're not voluminous, basically. I mean, we I think we've probably had about a dozen in the last sort of 12 months, and I think there may have been one case that we did question, but I think CPS get a lot more, but I haven't got their figures off the hand, but I can certainly get you those.
And will that have anything to do with arrest rates being down, generally speaking? Is that part of that? Does that have to be arrest in order to review?
No. As long as somebody is questioned, so that could be under involuntary intelligence.
Right, okay, great.
And there's a suspect that's been identified. So there's a 3-month time limit as well from the notification of no further action in the case.
Yeah.
And the victim can if they're still not happy with the outcome, they can go for a judicial review in the High Court. But we haven't had it.
No, I'm not surprised. But
okay. And this is probably important to note that this only applies to, I mean, obviously I've mentioned a 3-month time limit there, but pre-April 2015 cases it doesn't apply to. Okay. And clearly they are entitled to be kept fully informed and informed in a way that they want to be kept informed, when they're informed. So they can opt out. The victim code is quite prescriptive around the type of victim, in terms of timescales. For example, if you're vulnerable and intimidated, and I'll come on to that shortly, you are entitled to have an update within 24 hours of an event that occurs, in terms of maybe an arrest, or if somebody's then been remanded or released on bail or something like that, a significant event if you like, but they can opt to choose when they're updated as part of the victim contact agreements that we've got in place.
And I presume that only goes so far that officers will use their judgment as to what they can and can't tell someone about their case. So if a particular investigative route or something.
Yes, I mean clearly there will be certain aspects that wouldn't.
I suppose what I'm saying is it doesn't give a victim right to know everything about a case or an investigation. That it's more to be updated with progress.
This is more about progress and the current status of the crime, if you like, and the progress through to conclusion in terms of that. Okay, there are other entitlements as well in terms of compensation, to seek compensation, etc. But they're the main key ones on there. And clearly there is an option for victims to make complaints. So okay. So if there's no more questions on that, I'll move on. I'll get this right then. Okay, enhanced services. So under the code, certain categories of victims are entitled to enhanced services, and as a result of that, they receive a priority service. Pardon?
I think a no-2 priority service. That's familiar, but anyway.
Does it?
Yeah.
Right, okay. So we've got 4 categories there: vulnerable, intimidated, victims of the most serious crime, and persistently targeted. And these are defined under vulnerable, intimidated, specific acts. So Section 1617 of the Youth Justice Criminal Evidence Act 1999, if you want to know. But certainly what the vulnerable category is categorised as anybody under 18 years at the time of the offence, anybody who's suffering from a mental disorder within the meaning of the Mental Health Act 1983, anybody having a significant impairment of intelligence or social functioning, and anybody having a physical disability or disorder. The intimidated category.
Is there any scope on vulnerability? So if clearly someone is just presenting as very vulnerable but doesn't tick any of those boxes, can they be put in that category?
Ultimately,
I don't know, so an older, isolated person who's been a victim of burglary and very scary.
Well, it depends. I mean, we would apply a tailored service to that victim. Under this code, there are certain victims that are entitled to certain measures. So, in terms of special measures that we can apply to that victim, and we would use that judgment. Yeah.
One more question. I suppose it's coming across, maybe not fully yet to the public, but this is quite a prescriptive code. There's lots in it. It's very detailed about what happens to who when, depending on what happens to that person. I suppose what I'm trying to ask is there is flexibility in there for you to apply things to people that might not quite tick a box but feel like they need a priority service, or vice versa, right? I don't know what.
Within certain limits that there are, but it is, because clearly we're dictated to by statute in some respects in terms of what we can and can't do. But that doesn't
there's
mean to
lots
say
of
that
musts, I suppose. You must do this, you must do that, but there's nothing stopping you necessarily allowing you to do it for somebody else as well.
Yeah, I think some of the examples where we couldn't do that would be if somebody didn't fit the criteria, then we couldn't apply special measures when they're given evidence in court, because that would be against the law, and the law's there to support the court. So there are some examples where we can't, but there are others in terms of support and giving people updates and a little bit more support because they're more vulnerable that we would do.
But actually, the intimidated category, anyway, does allow for quite a bit of discretion. So the intimidated category is anybody whose quality of evidence will be affected because of fear or distress about testifying in court. Hence the reason it is a special measure potentially.
Yeah.
Any behaviour towards a victim and others, such as the accused or family members or associates of the accused.
Is that, are you talking about special measures here?
No, we're talking about the category of what comes into intimidating, but actually if we deem that somebody is intimidated, we could apply for special measures, which I'll come onto that into another slide, but you can have a range of measures.
And is that ultimately a decision for the police to decide if that's someone is intimidated, or if they say they're intimidated, that's enough for you to go, okay, who am I to argue with you?
No, okay, so we would complete a request, if you like. We would undertake a needs assessment, we would complete that assessment, and we would send that through to the CPS. The CPS would then review that, and they would also then make an application to the court, and ultimately it's the court's decision as to whether or not a special measure is granted. Okay.
Well, can I just add, from a support to cope and recovery perspective, there is a significant amount of discretion that we use in supporting victims in terms of access to support services. So different for us in terms of how we apply access to services. Less prescriptive for us than it is for force.
Yeah. Okay, so also within the intimidated category are, the nature of the offence can be taken into account. And so victims of sexual offences, human trafficking, gun or knife crime, for example, there are certain types of offences that are automatically considered intimidated. But again, there may be other characteristics such as the victim's age, mentioned there in terms of elderly, or social cultural background, or religious beliefs, or even political opinions and ethnic origin that can the circumstances of an individual in terms of domestic or employment circumstances can be deemed to be intimidated. Okay, so persistently targeted is somebody who, as it says on the tin a little bit, somebody who's targeted repeatedly as a direct victim of crime, such as harassment and stalking. That isn't normally two unrelated sort of crimes from that perspective.
I see.
And then there's the victims of the most serious crime. This is quite a wide category really, but we're talking here about domestic abuse, hate crime, murders, kidnaps, rapes, woundings, GBH.
And so what does priority mean then? What difference is there between a priority and non-priority?
Okay, so what the code says is that if you fall into one of those categories, then you may be entitled to special measures and certain support in relation to how you are supported through that criminal justice journey.
Okay.
So that's the first thing. And the other thing is around timescales, really, in terms of updating people and keeping them informed within
quicker,
a bit of a quicker. We did take some a policy decision some time ago in MIP to treat everybody within as quickly, in terms of the timeliness aspect.
You're not going to not update someone just because you don't have to.
Yeah. So the code says 5 days for everybody else and 24 hours, it's quite prescriptive really. But to try and then get that across, it's just a bit of a nightmare for frontline officers to probably, what timescale is it? So we just kind of say, right, or within the 24 hours, so everybody should get that timescale.
And given the logistics of policing and rest days and shift patterns and all the rest of it, is this a personal responsibility on officers to do, or is it shared amongst a team?
It's shared. There are certain responsibilities under the code at certain stages of the process, but there are support teams such as supported victims team, which assist with the code in terms of offering support services, and restorative justice services. There are our witness care unit, and I'll come on to that in some detail about what they would offer, and each stage, because we've got to remember that this is, I suppose, it's an ongoing process throughout, and at different stages victims have different needs. So at an early stage, you know, there's very much an onus on the officer to undertake an early needs assessment, an assessment of that victim in terms of their vulnerabilities, safeguarding issues, risk assessments, and anything else that may be pertinent that other then services within the organisation would then pick up.
And is it self-regulated in that, so if I'm an officer and I'm on leave and I forget to tell my colleague to update someone on a arrest or whatever it might be, if a victim doesn't, you know, they might not have read the victim's booklet in detail, they're not really sure whether they're supposed to have got an update in a week or a day or 10 days. Is it, you know, how much management information is there on when these things are done and how good we are at customer service effectively?
Okay, so there's very much a personal responsibility in some of this, in terms of making sure that people take their own jobs into account, and if they're off, they would have responsibility for making sure that the information is undertaken or the updates are given within the time frames in relation to their own victims, if you like. But there are improvements that we've made in terms of the victim witness module, which has just gone live, which I come on to it again a little bit further, which will help us with some further business intelligence information and data around that type of thing. At the moment, niche is restricted in terms of what you can pull off in terms of its compliance, if you like, because each individual record, you have to go into each individual record to then see, okay, what was the service this person has had, so as opposed to be able to necessarily pull off.
It's quite hard to keep track of.
It's quite hard to keep track of, yeah. We have certain elements of it that we measure a little bit in more detail, such as VPSs, but you know, it is something that probably you would be good for.
It's a customer service issue, isn't it? Really? And we get this is inevitable in policing, but a number of victims, you get frustrated that they get updated by colleagues of officers for leave, if nothing else, who might not quite have all the information to hand or quite understand the depth of the case or some of the nuances, and then it gets frustrating that the update wasn't quite communicated properly, and that can just then domino effect to have some frustrated victims. But there's no way around that particularly, I suppose.
There's a lot of work that we're doing, certainly between the witness care and the supporting victims team, and wider other teams in terms of officers that undertake some of the more sort of specialist cases, if you like, where we've got really sensitivities to try and join that up better and make sure that those communications are more cohesive, where that may be a little bit disjointed in parts currently. But actually, that said, certain categories of victims would get specific SPOCs, if you like, dedicated points of contact, which really do assist with that continuity of communication, which is really key, because it's a confusing landscape for victims, and they could have like several different people contacting them. And what we're trying to do is really pull that into, reducing that down. And there's some further work that we're doing in relation to the victim journey. We have done quite a lot of work already in relation to that, actually, but I think there's some further developments to do.
Say the police also get a lot when we get calls in our office where actually a case with the CPS for a long time and might not come back, but because the officer's doing an update saying there's no progress, they might get it in the neck for giving that, shoot the messenger scenario, isn't it? You'll talk about the victim contact a bit more in future, so I will.
No, that's fine. I mean, we do have with partners, so I was talking quite a bit internally there, we're looking at how we maximise technology as well in relation to that. So we are already connected up with the courts Libra system, for example, in terms of updates from the courts, because the courts equally have to update us within 24 hours of an event that's happened at court, and then that triggers then our actions. So there are responsibilities on other agencies that do feed into that, and it's about holding each other to account supportively in relation to that. And we've got a bit of a focus on that now through the newly re-established LCJB Victim Witness Board, which I'll come on to.
Yeah, and I think you'll mention this later, but it's making that as automated as possible, I suppose, without taking the person out of it too much.
Yeah.
Because it can feel a bit impersonal then. But you know, like we're all used to with loads of services now, if something's been delivered, you get an update when it's left a warehouse and when it's an hour away and all those things. We're used to quite a lot of information now.
Well, the victims strategy, I think, also looks at is going to focus on that information update giving in terms of how victims want to be contacted as well, because not everybody wants a personal call. Somebody's happy with a text. Some people are, and we should already be doing that, but I think times have moved on as well with the digital age and different requirements. So and how we link that back to what people in North Yorkshire want. So well, yeah. So I think there's probably going to be a bit of focus on that going forward. Okay.
So I'd just say what priority means from a supporting victims perspective. Enhanced entitlement, because it's not in my presentation.
No, we'll cover it when we get to yours.
Okay. Okay. So how are we complying or applying with the code? Now, there's quite a large number of things I could have touched upon here, but I'm conscious of limited time, and I've just tried to pick out some of the key areas. But if there is any other questions you've got, then clearly sort of ask me. So one of the main, first of all, getting that information out there and having that in a publishable form and an easy, understandable format. So we've devised, in conjunction with supporting victims, we've been with through the yourself through the OPCC and other partners within the victim sort of like family or and we've devised a booklet. Now we've just refreshed this booklet because it was quite hefty before in terms of its size, but we've had some very positive feedback on it, and what this aimed to do was to consolidate a lot of the information into
as we've been through, it's very complicated, isn't it?
It was complicated. But so we've picked out the best bits that we think in this booklet that would help a victim in terms of giving them the right information and actually signposting them to a whole range of support services.
It's also something they can hold on to, and as you say, you don't have to take everything in the first time. You
no.
might be speaking to somebody, so it's there for...
Exactly. And this is clearly sponsored by the Chief and the PCC. So it's very much been launched and driven at the the highest level in terms of our commitments to victims of crime. So the booklet itself has a range of information in it, including all of the entitlements around the victim code and what a victim and how they can go about and who they have to contact. It also has a range of information in there around supporting victims and how somebody can get help. It has quite a nice little diagram around the typical victim's journey, which is quite helpful, and it has a whole range of partnership aspects in there, and importantly it has quite a big section on victim personal statements as well and how a victim can have a greater voice. So there's a whole range of, I think there's like about 20 different chapters of content, but we did really condense it based on some feedback. I mean, when it was originally put together, we did do, whilst it was probably fairly limited, but we did do some market research and testing with victims, and then clearly we've listened to some of the feedback that our own internal staff have given us, but also other victims, and we've adapted it to that. So the booklet itself, there is an expectation that those victims that we go and visit, that the officers, the investigators meeting the victim will have that and go through that with them. And clearly with the advent of mobile data, mobile devices coming in, there is also links for it electronically as well. So not necessarily just a physical booklet, but sometimes people just like to, as you say, Will, to have it with them, go away and think about it, because at the time when they're speaking, that initial, that information is not necessarily going in. So there is an expectation that that's outlined. Those
when we say expectation, is there any reason that doesn't happen?
Well, there will be certain cases where we don't physically attend crimes. We don't physically go, and we expect our CROM, who currently send a booklet or a letter to all victims, with the exception of certain types of crimes, but they will actually do that on a daily basis. So they should all be picked up, but I can't say it would never.
No, of course, the mistakes happen, and that's a fact of life. But for the officers that are attending on a, however many a day, they're all going with booklets and handing those out as a matter of course.
They should be. Yeah. But as I say, with the mobile handheld devices, there are links on there as well they don't physically have. But there is an expectation that this is left and it's actually outlined, because it's a framework that helps the officers go through it actually and explain to them the offer of the VPS, for example.
I know this will be an oversimplistic assumption, but is there any value in having an app version, or if there's a national app or anything like that, that, given what you said about mobile devices and everything else, whilst it is really great to have a visual, I think, being able to send someone an app as well, or something like that.
I think we're looking at that. I'm pretty sure we're looking at that, to be honest with you, through our digital work. But yeah, I think that would be the way forward, really. Apps are the thing.
And it's a way to keep people updated as well, I presume.
Multiple different formats,
yes.
Aren't they potentially being considered?
Yeah. And as I said earlier, it's on a range of websites as well. It's there, it's available. So yeah, but an app would be good.
I mean, there is a whole raft of work going on nationally about, through Single Online Home, for example, of the whole public contact discussion. And I think some of it at the moment, for example, when we've looked at some aspects of Track My Crime, for example, depending on our technology and the technology that can be used, some of it still requires somebody to physically type that information in that then can be sent electronically.
Yeah.
So it's about the automation of that process and the right information going to the right people, that probably isn't as developed as it needs to be.
Yeah.
We've started that work though, haven't we? Because the victim contact agreement is now live on the mobile devices and has been for, I think, about 2 months. So from a compliance perspective then, because it's intuitive, we know that they can't move on to the next page till the first page is completed. So all of that data quality and mistakes that have been made should start to get better. So we're dipping our toe, I think, into the digital world, but I think we're about 2 years off Track My Crime, for instance, so we've got a long way to go.
And those where we haven't got access to IT, there is a victim contact agreement that is actually forms part and parcel of this booklet as well. At the front end, sort of, that can be physically given as some carbon copy. So we're trying to cater for everything really in terms of that. So that does bring us seamlessly onto the next one, which is actually the go live of the victim and witness contact module, which is also gone through our operational mobile tablets. So, and this kind of helps a little bit with the question you were asking earlier, I think, although it's quite early days, in terms of giving us some more statistics potentially. But it does capture a range of information, the actual module itself, in terms of repeat victims over the previous 12 months, and whether or not it's that question, has that victim of crime booklet been given, and you can't proceed unless you've answered it, and also the contact agreement. It also caters for sort of that early needs assessment that I mentioned earlier, and we can then start to put arrangements in place for support, so interpreters, for example, maybe. And so it consolidates a lot of the information relating to victims, and it then allows us to have a bit of a, I suppose, structured data set that we can search, and that's really important in terms of a searchable format, and we can reuse that data. So we're really looking forward to how this develops and how we can make further improvements around identifying any trends or themes, if you like. But it helps the officers on the front line as well and the staff, because they've got real time, they've got it there on their mobile devices, and they're able to submit their needs assessments, and that can, real time submission of information in terms of contact and how they want to be contacted and informed, and that's something that is quite a significant improvement on what we'd had previously, where officers, staff, they were filling in a lot of paper and having to come back to the station and scanning it in and sending it across. So some quite important developments, I think, here with this. It was launched, say, in September, so it's still relatively new, and it certainly does not allow an officer to proceed until they've gone through those processes, which actually then standardises it and makes it compulsory. So
it gives you the information you need as
yeah.
to how often it's done and how.
Yeah. So we'll see what that comes up with, really, in terms of that. So okay, anything else on that one? Okay. Okay. So that sort of brings me on to the witness care unit in North Yorkshire. So the witness care unit is, as I mentioned earlier, a statutory partnership in effect under the Victim Code, and they are based centrally, and they were formed under the government initiative at the time, which was called No Witness, No Justice, and essentially for support and information to victims and witnesses of crime from the point of charge to court. So that's quite important in terms of that distinguish, because there's obviously a range of support up to that point. It was originally established, as it says on there, as it was a multi-agency team consisting of the CPS in the unit. It was funded at the time through the victim surcharge, but as that's not necessarily kept up with the cost of living, etc., that some CPS have looked to provide their services in an alternative way. The CPS no longer form part of that unit, and also originally victim support were also part of it, the organisation Victim Support. But again, they've had very many restructure reviews, etc. So it is just basically police staff in there now.
So is anything being lost with the CPS no longer being part of that?
So we've worked hard with the CPS in terms of how we can fill that gap, and they have set up their own teams regionally in terms of victim units, dedicated victim units, but I think it's fair to say that we have lost some of the services in relation to that. I can't sort of deny that, really, and I've raised it personally to the DPP, but I know nationally the MPCC is looking at witness care units anyway in terms of how the service is delivered, because since that was set up, clearly there's been the advent of all the victim budgets and the grants and the Ministry of Justice, so actually a lot of forces anyway are delivering their witness care services in many different ways. There's not one standard model now, I think, and I think that's something that is something that is being looked at nationally. So I expect that may alter going forward, but we don't have the same, we don't have the links in terms of the IT anymore, although some certain discussions are pursuing in relation to that. There've been licence issues, not I think, but we do maintain regular contact and have meetings, partnership meetings with the CPS around some of that. And I think I know that as well the LCJB, the Victim Witness Board, of which CPS is part of, as are other partners, will assist with some of that, I think. it's an excellent unit in terms of the resource that it's got, in terms of what it does, and it did win an outstanding services to victims and witnesses award. Okay, so essentially the witness care unit, that's the service that they provide in very brief summary sort of bullet points. So the idea under the North Yorkshire Justice was that they would provide that single point of contact for witnesses and victims going to court, because it is that confusing landscape. So they are, and it's important to emphasise, a telephone service. So they're not a physical meet and greet support service in that respect, but it's very sort of virtual. But what they would do is they would, if there was a need for a face-to-face support, they would undertake referrals to the services such as supporting victims to provide that. Yeah. They will essentially, they've got the job of notifying witnesses in terms of attending court with regards to giving evidence at trials, etc. So they will they have responsibilities in terms of gathering witness availability during the case file process, and that is then, they are the conduit between the courts, the officers and the CPS, and probably and supporting victims and a range of other support services. So they kind of coordinate that. They ensure that the CPS have got the available dates, so the court can then schedule the case appropriately. Scheduling of cases is a complex matter, and it's a job of the courts to decide, but we rely on the CPS providing, from a prosecution perspective, about the availability of the prosecution side. Obviously there's other defence and other support services that they have to consider, so it is quite complex, and in some areas the courts do it themselves, but because they have direct access to systems, but we don't have that availability at the moment. But so they will undertake that, and part of their role is to undertake a full needs assessment with those victims who are going to attend court.
Is that specifically because needs might have shifted by this point?
Yes, absolutely. Needs change, and the closer a victim in particular, gets to a court date, that can be quite intimidating when you go into a courtroom, and it's intimidating for us professionals that may be going and doing it more regularly. But and so certainly, and also the impacts on crime may have developed on an individual.
Sure.
So they do a needs assessment, and if they have any particular support needs, then they would ensure that those needs are put in place, or there's a request for those needs that are put in place, to enable that witness to give their best evidence. So that could actually involve moving court, because wheelchair access, not all of the courts in North Yorkshire, for example, have got good wheelchair access. And that would also mean undertaking referrals to other agencies where required, so they'd try and coordinate that. So that could be if somebody for example, has declined a previous offer of support through an IDVA or an ISVA, which I'm generally come on to, but later on they feel as though they now would like that. There's no one point that a victim, if they don't say yes, you're not going to ever have it. Exactly. So it's an ongoing thing, and they basically should be keeping the victim updated with that within those timescales.
And the same team do the assessment as do the updates and the organising.
Yes, they do. Yeah. And they should be, clearly that should be a continuous process, as I said there. So and importantly, if somebody has had different bail conditions that have been issued at court, it's a very live process, really. And on that point, it's a small team, but perfectly full, but small team, 4.68 FTE, and they are dealing with an awful lot of victims and witnesses, as you can see on there, because clearly, those figures, it's probably about 40,000 witnesses per annum, really, and that's sort of slightly over a year, 45. But we're talking considerable numbers here.
You've got about 1,000 cases a year.
Yeah. So basically, they
Because they deal with all the witnesses as well.
They
so
deal with all the
much
witnesses,
higher.
so it's much higher. So out of those, there's 4,000 victims, potentially approximately circa. I mean, these are rough circa figures.
But that equates to about 1,000 people per.
Yeah,
employee.
any one time, each witness care officer will be dealing with an average of 49 victims a month and 563 witnesses a month.
Each one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a lot. So we need to bear that in mind in terms of being realistic as well about the type of service they can
Because
provide.
we do get feedback that sometimes things aren't passed on, or
Yeah.
messages don't make it to court, or
Yeah.
someone's not at court to greet someone who
Yeah.
needs greeting. But it puts it in perspective a little bit. But
Yeah.
It does, and we need to balance that off with the surveys that actually say they're doing a great job.
Yeah.
we would we would get those complaints, wouldn't we? The
Yeah.
few, and it's impossible to know how many that's reflective of. But people write to complain if something goes wrong. But given the number of people they interact with, it's a pretty low number.
It's incredible, and they do an absolutely superb job, and that they're very dedicated individuals that are really passionate about doing the job, and really care.
Just for the public,
Yeah.
the people who actually meet victims and witnesses
Yes.
at court
Yes.
and look after them in the witness
Yes.
room and show them around the court and take them to court are not these people, are they?
They aren't these people,
Yeah.
no. I do come on to another slide in
Yeah.
terms of the practical action.
Yeah.
So this is what I mean. This team, they will coordinate
Yeah.
that service through
Yeah.
the witness service. So actually, in terms of that communication chain, you can get, there are a lot of pieces to the pie, if you like.
Yeah.
So in terms of making sure that somebody is there available to greet a victim, another agency has to do their part as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, sure.
So we can pass the information
Sure.
on and so forth. So, it's quite a complex set of requirements really. But the next slide does give sort of the practical areas that the witness care unit will assist with.
Just going back a bit,
yeah.
how much of the work, that coordination work, is automated? So I presume that would make a big difference. I don't know the detail of what they do and how that could work, but that would make their life a lot
Yeah.
easier if some of it was things like pre-populated or.
Okay, so there'll be certain elements of that. So, for example, right from the start, when an officer does an early needs assessment and they've updated the tablet in terms of the journey, they should put if somebody needs some particular support needs. That should then be able to be picked up by the supporting victims team, who then who are the first part of the pie, if you like, in terms of that support sort of side, really, other than the officers. And then that information should be recorded where necessary through onto the niche system that could be then picked up by the witness care team, for example, or officers, because they would then be able to view. Clearly, there's certain protected information on the supporting victim side that wouldn't be able to be viewed because it's confidential. But there are, there'll be certain needs around that could be picked up. So there's certainly that there's some of that's automated. Because it's very individual needs based, it's quite difficult to automate it because these are individual people with different requirements. But
So,
where we
for
do
example,
referrals, we would automate that.
Yeah. So how does that work? So if I'm classed as intimidated, is there a system that you click intimidated and then a thing gets automatically sent to the court that means right?
I don't think it's that easy really. We still have to fill in a form and basically send it to court through a digital process.
Sure.
But we have to then physically.
So
there are
think
different
about the team.
types.
They put in. There's a lot of work in all that coordination as well as
There is, yeah.
joining all the dots. There's the paperwork that goes with it all. And
lot of
keeping an eye on
paperwork,
it.
absolutely. So it is an area that we hope through the victims' journey review that we're going to do through the RCJB will streamline some of those processes and absolutely digitise where we can and automate where we can, really. that involves linking up a lot
No,
of
I
different
know it's wishful thinking.
agencies.
I know.
systems as well, so-
Again, that's oversimplistic. I realise, but
Yeah.
there's at least there's opportunities there. How realistic they are, I don't know, but
Yeah. Okay, so I'm probably going way over time, aren't I here? Right, okay. So literally, I won't go through every single thing on this slide here, but there's a whole range of practical measures, and I've already touched upon most of them. So I will touch upon a couple in a bit more detail.
I suppose then, how many of those 40,000 odd people require that more specialist support, where there's things to consider and plans to put in place, where some of it is, I suppose, more you need to know the date and that's about it. You know, you need to be in this court on this date, and that's the solution to some people.
I mean, in 1718 we had 635 special measure applications. That gives you an idea. So it's not all low.
Pretty low
in terms of special measure applications, but that doesn't mean to say there aren't other additional
No,
support that was required over and above that.
Gives an indication.
But that
And is special measures something that's sort of proactively, not suggested necessarily, but you know, if you do you wait for someone to trigger? So the needs assessment gets done at point A, and then at some point does one of the team just go, I feel like there are some special measures needed in this case because you just sound more fearful than you did 2 weeks ago or something.
Yeah.
Or does someone say, we have a thing called special, to everybody, we have a thing called special measures, do you think you need any?
Yeah, so that's what should happen. So the individual should undertake an assessment of that. I mean, we would know at the outset what type of crime we're dealing with in terms of therefore the victim, and then what the characteristics of that victim might be. So that should already be available to us, and then we would tailor it around that.
I suppose the question is, do you get many requests for special measures rather than that being proactively detected by by one of the team?
I couldn't. I think it's something that we might have to outline first.
I suspect
is that knowledge of what's available.
How many victims would like special measures? That's not to say they would get them, because it's a court decision anyway. But people who feel a little bit intimidated, is that enough to get special measures or not? You know, so if there was more awareness, there might be many more applications than you could potentially deal with, or the court could deal with.
Yeah, I mean, again, from the earlier slide, it's quite prescriptive potentially. There is some discretion about how we then make that case to special measures. And there would be a threshold, I think, that the courts would have to.
And the team would go, you just don't qualify, and that's
And so
the officers have all been trained as well, haven't they? Because I think it also will dictate how they take the primary evidence gathering from each of the victims and witnesses as well. So.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good point. So there are certain victims that we would automatically go to video, ABE evidence, and video recorded interview, and that would in itself trigger off a range of support mechanisms right from that early phase. And there are certain categories that are automatically entitled to video links and live links and Okay, so again, linking with what the Chief has mentioned earlier, so we would undertake referrals to different agencies. We would undertake referrals to supporting victims. I won't touch upon that any further because Jenny will cover that. But we will also undertake referrals to the witness service citizens advice, which I thought was quite potentially worth outlining, because this is quite important, I think, for victims, because courts can be quite a scary place, to be honest, and we do try and encourage pre-trial visits for people, and really a pre-trial visit is to help somebody to familiarise themselves with before they go to court.
And that's not special measure, that's anybody's able to do that?
Yes, that's anybody that is able to do that. So that is a special measure. So that's something that is part of the needs assessment, that if the witness care officer would and a witness needs to would want to take that up, they would make arrangements to refer to the Citizens' Advice Witness Service, and they would explain the purpose of the visit and what to expect, and how the witness service can support them at court, and it could also assist with things like mobility and cultural and religious needs on the day. So they can be as prepared as you know, as there can be potentially for giving evidence. So I think that's quite an important thing to point out, really. And it just goes through the very practical things in terms of, well, where will they be standing? You know, where will people be sitting, and what, you know, what's the order of the court process, if you like. So that's. And again, we've talked about special measures a lot, but there's the other range of special measures. Just try and go through this. So screens in court, gowns and wigs removed, children, for example, so it isn't intimidating. Video recorded evidence we talked about earlier, just touched upon in terms of right from the start, but also live links in terms of how witnesses can give evidence into court. That's an area that will probably be expanding in the future, as we know. So, but there are a certain limited amount of availability where that procedure could take place now.
Notwithstanding that, is it more common now than it used to be that you sort of pass in year, I suppose, live links in particular?
I think with the advent of the types of crime that we're getting, yes, I think it is. Yeah. So the provision. It reflects more vulnerable people having to go to court for one reason or another. Yeah. And we really do need to look at how we're going to potentially build on that. Okay. I think I probably said it enough on special measures, haven't I, really? Right, victim personal statements. I know this is an area. Okay, this can give the victim a voice. It's something that should be offered at the outset, but actually can be offered right the way through the process, and a victim can supply a victim personal statement, several times if they want, because these changes. So basically, what it is, it's a statement in the victim's own words. It doesn't necessarily form part of the actual case in terms of the points to prove for a criminal a crime as such, but it helps the criminal justice agencies understand how the crime's impacted on the victim's life, and that could be emotional, physical, psychologically, or in either way, really. And it provides an opportunity for the victims to communicate verbally and or in writing, and it also expands to impacts not only on them but also their family members. So it's entirely a decision for the victim to make this, but what we are required to do is make sure that we've given an offer to the victim and actually explained what it is and what the purpose of it is.
How much do we know whether we do that?
So this is an area we've been trying to push and work on, and part of the challenges we have are around understanding the intelligence data around this, because without looking at each individual case again, and the recording of that and how that's recorded, so that's something that we are working to, but we have put in certain limited amount of processes in place to assist us with that. So we have a case quality review team, for example, who look at files coming into the criminal justice process, and they will have a VPS as one of their checks in terms of whether one's been offered or whether or not it's been recorded. So there's a bit of a vulnerability in terms of whether we are actually recording it. Doesn't mean to say that it's not been offered, but we should be recording that it has been offered. So that's
sure. And so the data is one thing. I suppose the quality of how VPSs are explained to somebody as a valuable thing to do, or it's in passing that you can do this thing called victim personal statement.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I presume that's even harder to get an understanding of.
So at different points it will be explained. So there is quite a section on this in the victim information booklet, which officers, if there's an expectation, should be outlining to them, and leaving the booklet with them or pointing them to the booklet where it's got quite a large section on what the VPS is and what the purpose of it. So that's the first stage, and at that point it might not all go in, so that then gets picked up at a later stage when the witness care officers make contact, and they also explain what the VPS is and the purpose of it. And then probably at a later stage, just before a victim's about to probably give evidence in court as well. So there are several stages in the process where it would be picked up, but
So how many get done?
The uptake is not great.
What is it?
So in 17-18 period, and again we just have to bear in mind some of the data, but we've got a record of 1304, not 13, 1,304 being submitted. So when we think about we might have 4,000 victims a year, you know, it's...
And are there some downsides to it? So
right.
Go on.
Yeah, so basically it's entirely up to the victims to whether they make it or not. We can't really be persuading them to do it or not persuading them to do it. We've got to be quite neutral at that point. But what the victim needs to... sometimes the victim is potentially put off by the fact that, you know, they don't want how the crime has affected on them be outlined to the perpetrator, really. And or potentially, you know, in a public arena, although they do have an option not to have it read out in court.
So they can supply it to a judge.
So they've got a number of options. They can actually apply to read it out themselves, and that has happened. They can ask for a third party to read it out. They can supply it through to the court and ask for it not to be read out. And they can get another the CPS, for example, to read it out. So there are a number of options there that, and it's a judicial decision in relation to it. But ultimately, unless there's a very good reason, say for example, it's not in the victim's best interest, the judge wouldn't, you know, the court wouldn't normally refuse their request, if you like. So there are a number of options around that. And it can potentially make a difference. It informs the court on those impacts in terms of potential sentencing. When I say it does impact on sentencing, you can't say, I mean, there's sentencing guidelines, etc. But and the court would have to take into account a wide range of things. Which one of them is potentially the impact on the victim. But so it may make a difference there, but it also helps. You know, there's been, you know, quite a lot of evidence around how it helps the victim feel as though they've been able to tell people.
So it's 1306 last year?
1304.
1304.
Yeah. Now, right. So clearly we're doing a bit more work on that.
First of all, how does that compare to others, do we know?
No.
So you could be doing brilliantly for all we know.
It could be. I know nationally that there haven't been significant updates on VPSs. The Victim Commissioner, Baroness Newland, has done a recent survey nationally on this, and I think it was 1 in 6. Was it 1 in 6 victims that don't necessarily recall being told about it or updated about it? I might have got that wrong. There might have been updates, but there's certainly a survey that she's undertaken nationally, which says across the country that it's not necessarily something. It's not high uptake across the country, and actually as a result of that, there is going to be a focus on the new victim strategy around VPSs. More, it's going to be pushed more. So it isn't. This isn't necessarily
from an awareness sort of communication point of view, or
I think
beefing up the code to make it. You've got to ask them even more. Ask victims even more. And
potentially both, because they are going to feed into probably updating the code. But I think it's probably more of an awareness point of view, really, because again, it's that, as we talked about earlier. It's, you can tell somebody something at the outset, but they won't necessarily be taking that bit of it in.
No.
Yeah.
And so that's probably not the time to tell them.
No.
But I get it also a bit later in the process.
And the average is 1 in 6. Our figures are better than that.
Yeah.
Well, so it'd be really interesting to do some limited work, just to get an understanding of where we compare with a couple of other MSF forces or something.
I think there's something else, though, isn't there? The number that we do is one thing. The quality of what we do, whether it made a difference to the victim, how did they feel afterwards, is the outcome that we're after, isn't it? So the number is just an indicator. I think what we are saying is there's lots more to do, and you know that nationally and locally as well. So we can compare numbers if you want to, but that will just give us an indicator of how many we've done rather than anything else.
Sure, but if we're but I totally understand that, and how it helps the victim and with the judicial process is really important. But if we know it really helps victims and it helps the process, knowing we are low compared to others is an interesting grounding for us to know we do have work to do. Or actually we're doing really well, shouldn't rest on our laurels, but we're doing really well, and the team and everybody who's involved in pushing, well, you can't push them, raising
Yeah,
it.
you can't. That's a requirement.
Raising it as an option
Yeah.
is really good, and you know we'll comply with any new victim case that comes out, but keep doing what you're doing,
Yeah.
rather than we do need to proactively spend time improving how we do it.
Absolutely. We have done a lot in terms of trying to push the message out, but again, you know, there's more we can always do. You know, we've recently, we've recently submitted further circulations through our internal intranets and briefing around messages of the day. We've got a sub-site internally that people can go to for guidance and advice, and we've recently, you know, we would signpost victims on our witness care letters, for example, to various websites, and also including sort of the Home Office and so forth. So we're doing quite a lot of information to push that information out, but it's about how we also make sure that we're recording that we're offering it. That's the challenge for us a little bit.
Do we ask the 2,694 odd victims who don't do it why they don't do it?
So basically, we've just undertaken a survey in conjunction with yourselves, and that survey is currently being analysed. It's Polly that's doing it, and I think she's had quite a good response. And what we specifically asked the question: are you being informed about it? And actually, if you are, you know, have you made it? And also, you know, if you haven't made it, why haven't you made it? You know, what's putting you off? So actually, you know, we're trying to understand the public in North Yorkshire and what they're telling us. And so that is just Polly is just pulling that together now. She's had the responses in. We wanted that to be independent as well of us a little bit, so we could see the truth on that. So, not that we wouldn't give the truth, if that makes sense. But
on the pushing it front, which I know the police can't do, the police can raise it as an option, but that's about it. Is there anything others can do, so be it supported victims and or IDAS or those kinds of people that can push it as a positive and get people who've done it to explain why it was a benefit to them, be it emotionally or in the justice process? So the police can't say anything, but you can say you can talk to your IDVA about this, who might then have something, a video to show somebody.
Part of all of our service specifications is to make sure that victims are informed about the opportunities to make the victim pass this in. But again, we wouldn't necessarily say that we push, but what we do is share the information about how positive the benefits can be.
Yeah.
But we also explain what it means and what might have to happen further down the line.
And in that sense, when you say you can explain the benefits, is that something the police can't really do?
No, absolutely. We can explain the purpose of it. We can explain, you know, how they go about it, and the process of it, and what you know may be of benefit. But what we can't do is, you know, we can't be sort of, you know, almost forcing people to make money.
We can't say categorically this is going to cause
we can't
the offender to get a greater sentence.
No, we can't, because actually we can't determine that.
No, of course not. But it's more if there. I don't know what the evidence is that they are effective things to do. If not from just a victim cope and recovery point of view, from a I don't know what the evidence is, but if there is evidence there, can we just?
Yeah, it's not the same for everybody, is it? So what we're trying to, I think what we're aiming to do through the guidelines is tell people about it, but it's about what's best for them as an individual, and they've got to make that decision, rather than us trying to push them into something that we think is best for them or best for the court case. And I think that's why the guidelines just go to that level, and I think that's appropriate, isn't it?
It is. It's about that cope and recovery and about giving them a voice. It's not necessarily about making, you know, as you say, for the case. Although we do know that it's a potential impact, and they can be very powerful as well. And we've had some very good successes. I know Dino has had some very good successes in terms of some powerful cases where, you know, families of victims have made evidence. And
I suppose it just sounded like at the beginning now, and it could have been me interpreting it on your behalf, but that you would like more victims doing it. That Vision 100 felt like you could and should be getting more, but that might be my projection onto you rather than what is you were saying.
I think personally I can see the benefits of it, but I absolutely get that it's a matter for it's a personal decision. I think the more information we can put before a court, the better outcome there may be for an individual.
Well, I think the other risk as well, isn't it, is that you can do this too early in the process.
Yeah.
So, and again, this is where it needs to be victim-led, because actually it might be that it's 6 months, 12 months down the line that they're suffering the symptoms of the crime, and we've taken a victim personal statement right at the start when they weren't as impacted by it.
Yeah. And
so
it's a really good point because of the timescales, you know, in terms of transforming summary justice and better case management in the Crown Court and the Magistrates Court. Some of these cases can come to court pretty quickly. So actually, by the time a case is, in some instances, in the magistrate, you know, it's been done and dusted before maybe the full impact of a crime has come out. So that is a really important point. But what we can do is we can then submit several, you know, if somebody makes an initial statement, but then the circumstances have then developed, before they're about to, you know, before the court's about to sentence, we often get, you know, requests from the CPS to say, are there any updated victim personal statements, for example, and we would try and be proactive around doing that at those types of cases. So.
Okay. Well, I wonder if it might be something, Polly went thank you for this, that our office can do in terms of assessing where other false areas are in numbers of victim personal statements given. I just think it gives an indication. It doesn't give us that much information, but it just gives us an indication as to
where we sit. Yeah. No, that's
the interesting bit's going to be the survey, isn't it?
Yeah.
If
there's a practical decision from all those people not to do it for whatever reason applied at the time, that's that. You know,
I think what might be useful is understanding what types of crime have been committed against particular victims that are looking to take these type of offers up. Because I think that's a
really important point as well, Phil, because you know, somebody who's had their shed broken into, for example, that, you know, is not necessarily going to want a VPS compared to somebody who's had some of the type of.
So you'll only catch some people anyway, because of all those 4,000.
That said, somebody who has the shed might want to, and they're perfectly entitled to it. I'm not belittling that at all, but it's relevant.
Of the 1,304, are we capturing some of the crime types that we would expect? Actually, this could have a significant impact on the victim's life.
Yeah, I'm sure we have. I haven't got that data here, but I could potentially have a look at that. Yeah, definitely. So it's an area that I think will develop. I think further going forward. So, okay. Just tell me to move me on if you want.
Yes, if you can.
Really quick. Really quickly then. Okay, no problem. Local, I've already mentioned this. This is the Local Criminal Justice Partnership business plan, refreshed business plan, 18 to 21, and we have now got a new victim witness subboard, and the direction is to deliver joint services victims and witnesses, especially the vulnerable. Okay, and there's a whole raft of actions under there in terms of what the outcomes we're trying to achieve, and we can go through that in whatever detail you want or not.
Well, so I suppose the only question I've got, and I wasn't there, so it's hard for me to say, but when Baroness Neelove came up and Julia met with her and the supporting victims team and yourself, we gathered some people for her to speak to, the feedback seemed to be along the lines of those victims of serious crimes or the more vulnerable victims got really, really good service and were really pleased with how they were dealt with and updated and supported. And those victims of crimes that are on the face of it less serious got less support, and the updates probably weren't quite so timely and might not have been quite so full, and it seemed to be a sort of divide along those lines that naturally lots more effort was put into the higher harm stuff, but at what point does it sort of become too inconsistent a service at the other end? And but we don't, the management information, I suppose, to verify that is quite difficult to come back from what it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we do try and put the resources, the risk.
Sure. That's policing.
Absolutely, and we, you know, we're going to make some difficult choices, but nevertheless, we should be, you know, giving the service to all victims. That service may differ in terms of the requirements around support, etc. You know, I think we would need to develop the intelligence just to say that was actually the case, but you know, I can't. You know.
No, and it's only anecdotal, and I've got some close friends who've been witnesses who didn't maybe get the service they would have liked, but how reflective that is. You know, it sounds to me, given how busy they are, and you're one of the ward in Bath, for example, so
I mean, clearly, you know, there's always more that we would like to strive to do. And as I said, the team themselves are very dedicated and passionate about what they do. And this is about all of our responsibilities. It's not just a team of 4.68 as well. So
no, and I suspect that's where some of the issues lie. It's with those issues we talked about before, with people on leave or rest days and all the rest of it, and some of the messages, that personal responsibility bit, which I'm sure is taken very seriously, but there will be lapses, won't there, where it just isn't possible.
Okay, so there's a whole raft. There's a separate business plan in relation to this that, and in fact the inaugural meeting is actually on Thursday, and I've persuaded the courts to chair this meeting because I think they've got quite a lot of pivotal aspects in relation to this in terms of court listing, etc. So and they, you know, so that's good. And they will be undertaking an intrusive review, self-assessment around the victim code in particular.
Question: I've had a couple of victims ask if they can make an application for their case to be heard in a particular court, so they might be shunted around it. A court that's only got one court room, whereas they know, I don't know, making this up a little bit, Teesside has a number of courts and you're more likely to get heard maybe on the day that you're due to get heard rather than adjourned. Is that something victims can do?
Not really, no. If there were, I mean, listing and the locations is a matter for the court, and depending on some jurisdictional factors in some respects, but for Crown courts, you know. So if there were very particular reasons, then we could make some application on their behalf. So, for example, you know, mobility access, wheelchair access, that sort of thing. But
more
other than that, is, you know, the more normal day-to-day general listing, because that would be determined on a whole range of factors, such as, you know, availability of magistrates, judges.
No, it was not so much the decision making itself. It was more can a victim, you know, it's a bit like in the NHS now. You're a bit more in control of where you go, and this. I
think moving forward, when we develop live links further potentially, I think there may be some hopefully more flexibility in terms of, you know, victims being able to stay in their local locations and beam into different courts with a courts transformation programme. I think that's the way we're heading. So, so I won't touch on anything else on there. Right, I've probably touched upon this, and I probably won't touch upon it too much greater unless you've got particular questions. But we have a range of dedicated points of contact within our criminal justice team to look at particular types of cases. So in terms of gatekeeper functions. With regards to the RASO cases, which is rape and serious sexual offences, but also non-RASO cases, and they will look at a whole range of far quality aspects. So and include when they're looking through their checklist, if you like, in terms of what they're looking for, they will have a mind to the victim code, and along the bottom there, so victim personal statements, again, restraining orders, whether we're getting the right restraining orders. Again, special measures, and there's a national domestic abuse checklist for certain requirements, and to make sure that we have the case as ready as it can be before it goes to CPS for a charging decision at that very, very early point. So there's a whole raft of work around case file quality that this team undertake, and that they have been very successful in terms of being a bit of a corporate coach, but also making sure that the cases that are going through to CPS are actually getting the charging decisions and outcomes. So they've been in the region, they've been amongst the highest charging rates in the region as a result of this process. Something that the CPS are particularly keen on, and there's some really, really good evidence around how it's reduced waste in terms of triage, the CPS triage, in terms of that process coming back into our frontline officers. But, you know, which in effect, all of this process, I know we might think you're getting a little bit off piece, but in effect, all of this process has that focus of the victim all the way through, and clearly then allows our frontline staffing officers and actually the CPS to you know, focus on those cases newborn as a victim. So there's a whole raft of stuff I could talk about that, but I'm really conscious that I'm running out of time. So please do ask me some questions if you do want me. I want to come back at some point. We're coming to, I think, an end now. It's got a couple more slides.
Tell you what, my question, going back a bit, but stay on the slide, the victim and witness subboard, if that's the right.
Yes.
Are all partners reflect on that? So we also get feedback in the office from other partners post-trial, not holding up, I think it's victims code stuff, but about updates about offenders completing courses and things like that victims don't always get. So the CRC, in some cases, should have a victim spot, and we've had a number of cases where that just hasn't been put in place.
Okay, so the CRC and probation, I'm just trying to think if they've been invited.
I think they have. I'm not sure whether they're members or whether they're
I'm sure they don't have
because they're a part of the Business Development and Innovation Board.
Yeah. So basically, the answer to that is if there are issues that were picked up in terms of trend like that, they are part of the main criminal justice board. So it would absolutely be no issue to bring them into a thematic or something around that.
Trend is probably too strong a term, but just the odd case. And again, I'm sure they're part of that. In the full sort of victim case, pretty small, but we have had a couple of things go wrong at that age.
Clearly, the PCC chairs that board.
Yeah.
And those agencies.
Yeah. So I've raised them as specific so far. I haven't necessarily raised it as a. Is there something more amiss there?
We have a Business Development and Innovation Board next week. If you want me to raise it specifically.
Yeah. Okay, so essentially, it's a good forum though. It's a good point. Okay, so professional development. We've touched upon many of these before. We are really, constantly driving. Hopefully, you've seen to improve development in this area as well in terms of services to victims. So we've had a range of activity, and part of that was to commission an internal audit through RMS, which is our internal audit company, and there were some recommendations that came out of that in terms of victim contact and the preferred means of contact, and I've touched upon how we're meeting that with regards to the contact agreement and the mobile data and the new victim module, which I think will go a long way to assisting with some of that. And some of this is about how we drive out those messages in terms of recording. Well, that is going to be built in as a matter of course now, and officers staff aren't going to be able to move forward without recording it in a very particular format.
But dare I ask, what proportion of officers are appropriate to have done that have completed the victim code e-learning module?
So that's been put down as a compulsory MCAL package, training package. We've done training needs analysis, and the deadline for that hasn't been reached yet. So we are getting weekly updates in relation to.
When's the deadline?
We've got
several
programs. There's that many mandatory programs.
I know. Well, this is what
we've got a calendar. So we've got a calendar. So we've broken it down into the year within the calendar. So we've placed within a 2-month segment within the year. Over the next 12 months.
I think we've got about 20% completion at the moment, but that's just been launched as a compulsory, so it's quite early days.
I know. I was going to ask if it was compulsory, and then coming back to there's lots of other things that are compulsory.
So at the moment the compulsory ones are disclosure and the unconscious bias training. So again, it'll be within the next 12 months of the calendar.
Yeah. So
we'll come back to that then. When it's had that window.
Absolutely, yeah. And so there's a lot of training that have been done over the years, but as with everything, with changes, it's a constant refresher process, and we're kind of moving away from a lot of classroom training now for other methods. So that's been done. E-learning there we talked about. There's a whole raft of library material available, and we've done a number of communications to raise the profile and the survey that we talked about there. So there are probably other things that I could probably mention, but I've probably one or two run out of time now.
Yeah.
So
let's read the next two.
The next two.
I suppose the next bit, Leanne, is what's next.
What's next? There's a whole load of frameworks that we're looking on. This kind of one just touches upon the focus on disclosure and how we're getting it right first, time in terms of the file quality, whether we don't let victims down. There's a gold structure in relation to that. These are national issues. It's not necessarily to North Yorkshire.
And is that not victims code per se, just victim?
It's just around victim focus, really, doing the right thing. And there's a new framework that's come in there around the capacity around criminal justice in terms of the wider, which has very specific victim sort of module elements to it, which includes the victim code. But also there's a new domestic abuse best practice framework that's coming in. So there are a lot of frameworks that we're working, and they all pick up elements of the victim code throughout it. So that was just really to say that we're well on with that, and we're quite far ahead actually in terms of some of our other forces. But there's a national developing picture on that. And really, this is just final in terms of we need to maximise technology. So there's lots of stuff in the future. I've mentioned Track My Crime there. It's something that would be an online service we touched upon earlier for victims in terms of being able to look at
so how far away
crime.
is that?
So we're waiting for some developments on niche before we can actually roll that out. There's a new module, a new version, isn't there, of niche?
Yeah, we've had it tracked for at least 2 years, I think, in terms of it being a priority for us, and we are quite a way off in terms of priority, both in terms of the capacity for change through Maria's team and DISG resource as well. So we revisit it often at Digital Board and through the forum. So we're just trying to prioritise things like the mobile data and other things. So my guess is at least 18 months?
I think so, yeah.
2 years.
Yeah. And it may well be that things developed then anyway without the victim module, if that makes sense, because I guess the purpose of this slide is just to say, we need to maximise technology more, and we are looking at that, and it's very much on our agenda. There's the live links there, hence the mixture of the van and the building in terms of a mixture of static and mobile potentially, and basically making sure that we're linking all that up with other agencies to provide the best customer service. So it is what we make it, which is what I've said there really, and there's lots of victim-focused activity that we're undertaking.
And there's via the mobile working, you'll get more management information about how practically the victims code is being upheld, and hopefully practical officer to victims.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And it's not just the technology itself for Track My Crime. There also has to be a value, a perceived, recognised value, doesn't it, from the victims? Is this really valuable to me to know this?
Exactly.
What it can tell me at the moment.
Yeah, it's another suite. It's another option. It's another option in the suite of support, isn't it? If a victim wants to go on and log online at 4 o'clock in the morning because they're on shift, then it's there potentially. But that might not be everybody's cup of tea. And again, it's not a compulsory thing, and it wouldn't take away the need for that personal service and interaction. But it's just another option, right?
And it relies on being fed with the information that's put into it, so it's as good as the information being.
Yeah. So, okay. So sorry, taking up your time significantly. I'm sure there's loads of questions, but okay.
Thank you very much.
And we'll follow downtown and backwards.
From the hand.
How long do I have, Will? Will, how long do you want me to take?
Half an hour.
Do it, really? Okay. So we can go through all of them. Yeah?
I might speed you up at the end,
Okay. Right. Okay. So this is a relatively short 10 pages presentation just on updating you on our journey in relation to support services for victims. So the aim of our support services were to cope with the impact of crime and recover from the harm caused. So that is the overarching aim of the services that we've developed. In terms of the journey we've gone on, so first stage, understanding victim needs. Second stage, looking at what kind of locally commissioned services are required based on that. And then this third stage, which is the stage we're in now, is what do we do going forward? What gaps do we need to fill? Where do we need to develop the services that we've got?
Sorry, Jack, I know it's slide one, but it's relevant to this. So, to help the people of North Yorkshire,
yes,
can you just say what happens if you're a victim of a crime? You're from North Yorkshire, but you're in somebody else's police area.
Yes.
Or the other way around.
Yeah. So if you are a victim of crime whilst you are in North Yorkshire and you live somewhere else, you will be able to receive support services in your locality. And the same goes for victims of crime who live in North Yorkshire but are a victim of crime in another force area. They would be able to receive support services within their home locality, so where they're a resident.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. So, stage one. I'm going to do the same now. Yeah. So, the first stage was understanding victim needs. So, in 2014, as it says at the bottom of the slide there, we undertook a significant victim needs assessment. And the findings of that victim needs assessment supported us to understand what we would commission as services going forward and what we needed to do to be able to achieve the things that victims were telling us they wanted from support services and services in general across North Yorkshire. So the key things in there were about taking control, keeping them informed, making sure that they can understand what's happening to them and how it might affect them or others that they were concerned about. What it means to be able to act for yourself. So how can you provide, how can you, a means to act for yourself. So how can you support yourself going forward? A way that you can understand. So that's about talking to people in language that's important to them. Providing specialist support accesses to you when you need it, and providing you with the means to get your life back on track. That was a key one. So people wanted to be able to go back to the point before they'd been a victim of crime, or perhaps improve their life as it was prior to being a victim of crime. So
that was 2014.
It was 2014. So stage two. So on the back of the victim needs assessment, we needed to make decisions around what type of services we were going to provide in North Yorkshire, and the information that we got from the victim needs analysis allowed us to prioritise the development of those services. So the first key thing that we wanted to achieve was we needed to have a victim referral process. So we needed to be able to have anybody who was a victim of crime come into a central team, have their needs assessed, and then decisions be made about what type of support services would be best for them. So that's the victim referral services, which is in the heart of the circle there. So initially this team was an outsourced service provided by victim support, and then decisions were made to bring the service in-house, and we now have an internal team who are telephone based, who basically they will either make direct contact with a victim or they will refer via a letter to say you can refer yourself, you can call the central team and have a needs assessment if you want to.
And just to summarise for anyone listening, the reason we decided to set up a new service was we were getting value for money from the national service we were buying into effectively.
So we moved from the national service to a locally commissioned service under victim support. What we wanted to be able to do is further specialise our service and make it bespoke to the needs of North Yorkshire. So we thought we could do that better in-house than as an outsourced service. So yes, we made that decision to bring the service in-house. So that service, and this is where the enhanced entitlement comes in, which Leanne was talking about as part of her presentation. So we make direct contact with victims of enhanced entitlements. So those victims of the most serious crime or victims who are intimidated, and where we send out letters to those who are indirect victims of crime, so those who aren't considered to have enhanced entitlements. And that's the approach we've taken from the start of the process, so since we started the services in 2014.
And again, this doesn't apply to victims of ASB, however serious.
No, this is purely victims of crime. So one of the key things that victims told us on the survey was that they wanted fast and free access to counselling services. So that was one of the key developments in 2014, was to understand what the specification needed to be for a counselling service, put it out and provide a counselling service in North Yorkshire. So that's quite different to a number of areas. Not many areas provide a paid for counselling service. And then the other two key areas were around having practical and emotional support through the journey, so from the point of crime, potentially through a criminal court case and beyond if necessary. And those two areas are covered by the Independent Victim Advisor Service and the Specialist Domestic Sexual Abuse Service. So these are ISVAs and IDVAs, so those are Independent Domestic Violence Advisors and Independent Sexual Violence Advisors. So these individuals hold the caseload. Yeah, they are. So they support from the point of crime all the way through a criminal case and beyond, and they are there to provide practical and emotional support for individuals. And the same goes for the Independent Victims Advisor Service, but these are for non-domestic or sexual cases, so where there are individuals who are enhanced entitlement, so intimidated individuals or those of victims of serious crime. And then the fourth is the Restorative Justice Service. So as Leanne referred to, it's an entitlement for victims of crime to have access to restorative justice, and this is a commissioned service where individuals can meet with their offender and understand, to help the offender understand the impact of crime for them.
Yeah, we'll come on to that later a bit.
Yeah. So, moving forward, so these next slides just tell us a little bit around what we've learnt since we commissioned those services in 2014. So in terms of the Independent Victim Advisor Service, so we've got dedicated support with a strong focus on local needs can have a real impact. So how we measure success in relation to these services is around across 9 categories of needs. So this is individuals from their own perspective saying what kind of needs do they have and at what level is that need on entry into a service. So that's on a scale of 0 to 10. So this is actually in relation to my mental health. I've got significant needs right now entering the service. I might give myself a score of 8 or 9. And then the personal development plan that's put in place with the victim looks to address the specific needs that they might have over the course of the work that individuals do with them. Just
to give an indication of how much things have changed in 5 years, how much of this and the slide you just had before was available 6 years ago? So we had an ISVA service, so those for sexual and domestic victims of crime, where there were individuals who supported them with criminal recovery services. In terms of the availability, it was much lower, so we had we could support much fewer individuals with that. We didn't have an Independent Victim Advisor Service, so that wasn't available. So unless you were a victim of sexual or domestic crime, you wouldn't have that case management type support through the journey. We didn't have a counselling service, and we didn't have a restorative justice service. Would anyone measuring these kind of things?
No, we didn't. No.
Do you measure repeat demand, Jenny?
We
are
a
reduction in repeat demand as a result of this. So I was looking at your reduction in mental health needs.
So what we measure is for an individual where they were at the start of their journey, where they are at the end of their journey. We also then look at measuring, although it's very challenging with the data that we hold at the moment for a number of reasons, some of which are exactly the same as Leanne's kind of concerns around being able to pull information from niche that's kind of accurate and timely and useful without a great deal of work being done to it. So we try to, but actually the measures that we've got at the moment are probably not accurate or useful enough to share.
Because I mean, the other reason I was thinking on that was actually there's a potential opportunity there, isn't there? If you measure that over a period of time and see a reduction in repeat demand for our services as a result of the positive mental health work you're doing, that's data we could be sharing with our health partners around actually. If there's an improvement in mental health services provision, whether that's street triage or whatever, then here's the potential impact from reduction in services for us.
And well, counselling, nothing else. I know there's demand for counselling via your service, but it's not, the wait is not as long as it is, you know, via other NHS feeds, for
it's
example. So there's a
access.
service there that never existed before that are helping people get better.
Yeah, and I guess so what we need to remember is these are victims of crime, so the crossover will be there for some of these in terms of cohorts, but it's not going to be a pure crossover in terms of cohorts.
Sure.
Yeah. But yes, there is a raft of information that we're collecting about progress of individuals who are residents of North Yorkshire that we could overlay with other information if we had intelligence systems that helped us to do that. At the moment, we're challenged on a daily basis of trying to get the best out of that information, but there's more we could do with it. Yeah.
So this isn't about the people that are ringing the police for assistance because of mental health issues, is it? It's about, you know, I've been a victim of crime and therefore I don't feel as well as I could. And then at the end of that journey, they're actually feeling better than they did in the beginning when they were a victim.
Yeah, some of these might be domestic
Will there be an overlap?
Yeah,
Yes,
there
will be crossover.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I won't go to that anymore, but it's how we measure our successes,
Sure.
about people
Really
starting
good.
on a journey with us and people
Really
coming to the end of a journey, and we measure it again. We measure it throughout the journey as well. And then we have hopefully an accurate understanding of who is making progress, who isn't, and then they can focus in activities on those individuals that aren't making progress. Or we make a decision that actually they make referrals onto other key specialist agencies to be able to address that need further. So it gives us a really useful set of information, and it's available across all of the services that we commission for victims as well. The other things that we've learned, so potentially the need for specially trained IVAs in relation to, for example, stalking. So what we have is a team of, again, and I don't like using the word generalist, but these are specifically trained to support victims of crime and specifically trained to support victims of crime who are of the greatest need, i.e. they've been a victim of quite a severe crime. However, there are specific training needs around specific crimes that at the moment they don't have. So there will be victims who are referred to them who have specific needs around stalking or harassment, and actually
Can I add similar one in there?
Yes.
Just the more work you've been doing recently. I was at a conference yesterday listening to a number of victims talk revenge porn.
Yeah.
The ongoing threat to it coming back at any point in time, and the impact, you know, lots of people have stopped work and has such a massive impact. But it's not, it would never make a serious crime, generally speaking. But the support they need, I would have thought, is quite specific.
Yeah.
Just add it into your list of many things you
Yes. There are a number of things that are on that list now in terms of specialist training for those generalist workers in order to be able to better meet the needs of those individuals. Because what we've done with our services is make sure that there is no victim of crime who couldn't receive a case management type service. So they would go to an IVA if we don't have a specialist service, i.e. the domestic or sexual specialist service. But in order to ensure that those individuals get the best service, we would need to make sure we've got specific training, or we consider whether there is enough need and demand to commission a separate service in relation to that cohort of victims.
Some do with stalking, but very few. A couple of BCCs, I think, have specialist stalking support.
And the last one is probably mirrored across our services, so the need to focus on victims' voice and feedback in service design and delivery. Again, there's more we could do around this in terms of victims' focus groups and making sure we take learning from feedback provided by victims, but we are trying to maximise that.
How are you doing that?
So we have a survey at the end of every kind of victim's journey with us, and they provide feedback in terms of kind of the one key thing they'd improve, the one key thing they would recommend to somebody else.
What does that? Do we do anything with
Yes,
that?
we
don't
do
just ask
that.
them and then put it in a drawer.
It's used as part of the contract management process to help providers focus in on how they might develop the services. So it is utilised. Again, couldn't necessarily bring that out and show you exactly where it's made improvements, but there are a number of ways it has made improvements to service.
Okay. I'm going to try and ask less questions.
So, my question. Counselling and restorative justice, so what we've learned. So in relation to counselling and RJ, so investing in promoting the benefits to victims internally to improve referral conversion, positive impact is significant. So this is around helping our partners and our internal colleagues within NYP around the opportunities that are there in terms of support centres, particularly on restorative justice, where actually we could have additional referrals into that service. Maybe we could make more use of it if people understood that it was available, how it was available, and what the requirements to access
Going back
it
to
were.
the victims code, can we push these things, or are these just options? You know, they can be pushed.
These can be pushed, definitely. Yeah, less so on the counselling front, because obviously these are kind of victims of crime, but from a restorative justice perspective, there's lots of routes into that kind of provision.
And it's something as well that our witness care unit would offer.
Right.
You know,
because we've struggled to get numbers through there, haven't we?
Yeah.
Is that improving, Jenny?
Yes. Yeah, we are improving it, and that is evident in the figures. Like, I don't have them to hand in this presentation, but in terms of the number of referrals are going up, the conversion of the referrals into either an indirect or a direct restorative justice intervention are going up. But when you look at the numbers, they don't look huge. There is more that we can do around that, definitely. Stands to reason, but complex crimes require more time and more resources, and we have had quite a number of complex crimes coming through to the Restorative Justice Service particularly, but also to the counselling provider as well. So we offer, within counselling, we say we have a standard of 10 sessions, but actually it's reasonable for the counselling provider to ask for another 10 sessions if this is a complex case and they need to work for a longer period of time. From an RJ perspective, we know that it takes potentially more intervention from a restorative justice worker and potentially 2 restorative justice workers to deal with a complex case. And we know that actually from a victim feedback perspective, complex cases can have a greater impact for the individuals involved. So we want to make sure we encourage that, but obviously it has an impact on capacity. Need for closer links to out-of-court disposals and community restorative disposals as well. It kind of links into the first point in relation to utilising the kind of the means by which we can refer in to the service and make the most of it. Yeah. Domestic abuse and sexual violence services. So obviously this is a complex area and an area that's increasing in terms of resourcing. So there is a kind of capacity issues in relation to services. So police recording is inconsistent. So we've got standard risk victims and flags and markers, and we're not always using a standard approach to things. GDPR now means explicit consent is required. So previously we've been able to work in a way that's meant if we thought the risk for an individual was such and support services were necessary, that we could make a referral into the support services without consent. Now under GDPR we are not doing that. We are only making referrals into services where there is consent. So it does
mean... Is that a
mean
one-time only thing?
In terms of...
So if you try and get consent once and you're told no?
Do we go back to an individual and ask if they've changed their mind? At the moment, we're not, because it's done at the point of referral.
We were talking earlier about people, victims taking in everything at that point.
Absolutely.
Because there were discussions at national level about GDPR where if you don't get consent, that's it forever. Even if they'll have to come to you. Even if you think there's something that you could provide, you can't go and tell them because they're not giving you their consent to do that.
And at the moment, that's around, so we contact individuals and ask them, and if they say no, they don't want to, then yes, we wouldn't be contacting them again. However, we can look at that and see whether there is an appropriate means to go back to and return to an individual to see if they've actually changed their mind or their circumstances have changed.
I mean, I think that would naturally occur anyway, because clearly as a case progresses through the process, there are various trigger points where a victim would be asked anyway, and if they then said they wanted exactly, so that would then become null and void in terms of the break. So I think that would just naturally occur. But
from a process perspective, for support, we're making the offer, and if the offer is declined at that point, at the moment, we're not circling back round. So we would just need to look at that as a process and an appropriate kind of GDPR approach to doing that, to make sure we're making another offer at another point in time, if that's the right way to do it.
Yeah.
So continued support for provider engagement requires dedicated work which needs recognition. So there's a lot of work going on with providers to register the work that they're doing and try to understand. So it might not be that it's a case management approach, but it might be multiple contacts over a period of time, which isn't considered to be case management, but actually it's a regular touch point with an individual in terms of the cope and recovery journey. So we're just trying to work through some of those. And because our domestic and sexual violence service is, if you like, the highest volume service, there are the most individuals being referred to that service. It's just monitoring and kind of managing the workload with them is really important. Individual support means high engagement, high satisfaction and trust leading to disclosure. The case management approach is really successful in that respect, particularly for domestic and sexual victims. So if the individual has a good relationship with their case manager, then actually the likelihood of them feeling able to positively participate in processes is increased. And whilst that's anecdotal information, I'm sure there is probably ways in which we could collect that information which would allow us to. Yeah, I don't think we're quite collecting our information in a way that would allow us to make those statements, but at the moment it's anecdotal information. Overcoming barriers to engagement, so in rural areas, requires dedicated resource and alternative contact and sensitive promotion. So as part of our domestic and sexual violence services, we do have outreach engagement work that goes on in our rural areas and our harder to reach communities. What we're trying to do is understand the impact of that work. It's not quite as straightforward as we'd hoped in terms of recording, monitoring what impact that's actually having. So we're just exploring that further with the provider. But actually we have seen some improvements in terms of self-referrals in those areas where we've been doing promotional work.
Just so you know, Jenny, the National Rural Crime Network's work on domestic and rural areas is nearing the end. Fieldwork almost complete, but they have found some evidence of a few different issues in rural areas, which I don't think will be necessarily news to us, but they might come up with some solutions to start to fill some of those gaps and what those victims who currently don't come forward might need to come forward.
That would be really interesting.
And then I'm going to ask you to be super speedy for the next.
I know. What I won't do is go through this slide in particular. So the Sexual Assault Referral Centre and the Child Sexual Assault Assessment Service are our two services for victims of sexual assaults, but it's the forensic service that we commission in partnership with NHS England. So we've learned quite a lot through that process, but the slide is self-explanatory, so I won't go into detail in relation to that. But we are currently looking with NHS England as to how we commission services going forward and whether there are better ways to do things together. So that's positive. Challenges. So the journey that we've been on is quite a significant one in terms of raising awareness of what we do and how we do it and how people can make the most of it, and I think we're still on that journey. So it says kind of organisational fit, supporting victims. Does everybody know about us? Do they understand what we can do and how we can support them to do their jobs? Probably not. There's more we can do on both sides, I think, around that. There are some specific issues around victims of crime. We've talked about fraud, I think, previously in one of these sessions, in terms of the process for fraud victims is complicated, and therefore it makes it more challenging for us to give them a support service that has parity with other victims of crime. So that's important that we kind of work through that. From a data perspective, GDPR has meant significant changes to our services and how people access them, so we're working through that. We have just purchased and implemented a case management system which should help us to manage our data and information more efficiently and effectively, and make information available more quickly to people who need to kind of see it, understand it and make use of it, which is really positive. From a responsibilities perspective, we are looking at widening the remit of victim to include non-crime incidents. So this is around ASB and RTCs. We're constantly looking at ways we can do that, but we're working within a resource, a finite amount of resource, so that's challenging. We've talked about the gaps in specifically tailored services, so around modern slavery, trafficking, stalking, harassment, young victims and rural crime. We've got increasingly complex needs of victims and whether they need specialist support and where we get that from and how we refer on. There's increases in certain crime types, particularly around domestic abuse, which means capacity issues potentially for some of our services. In terms of delivery, geography in North Yorkshire is complex and challenging. National ring-fence funding, so there are limits to what we can do locally in relation to services because some services are commissioned nationally. We have obviously put forward a kind of if you like, an ask centrally to say we are interested in having more services devolved. So we'd be very open to that in North Yorkshire. So that's part of the delivery challenges.
Sorry, Jenny, carry on.
Joint commissioning is a challenge. We want to do it, but it takes much more time, effort and resources to do it. So we have to pick areas appropriately. Analytical resource, what works when, and this is, again, challenges that relates back to some of the things we've already talked about.
Really interesting. There's lots to go out there. There's been an amazing amount of progress already. You know, but it's interesting. There's little tweaks you're keen to make here and there.
Just I'm mindful of this.
Yes,
I'm mindful of this. I would ask a long question in terms of because this is a contracted service, isn't it? Obviously, government funding came for victim support services, and victim support was a national sort of thing before, wasn't it? So how do we measure the effectiveness and efficiency of the service, i.e. value for money from the public, etc.? So I'm not sure whether we've got available any, and I don't mean today and now, the data of, so what's the cost versus the number of people who are being supported? Is that about the average for the national country, or actually are our victims getting a better service in terms of head count per cost? Those, and I know they're quantitative, and there's a lot of qualitative data, and how do we survey people about how was the service for you?
Yeah. So the first point, so we collect a suite of information and send it back to the Ministry of Justice, because the funding that we get that pays for these services is through a grant from the Victim Services Grant. So every area in the country provides that same information. So MOJ does that comparison. What doesn't happen is it doesn't come back out. So we provide that information centrally. The next stage will be how they share that, and I guess how they table us in terms of what are they using to define what's good, bad and indifferent. So that's part of the work that we've been doing with MOJ over the last 4 years, but quite kind of more recently in the last 18 months, to really get everybody on the same page, providing the same information so that they can compare. So really, hopefully that's now within MOJ's gift to provide us with that information.
Can we request that information? Because I don't think we've ever seen it. It just might be quite interesting to see how those services
are. And we were told we can't have it, but yeah.
How do we know then if the contracted commission service is performing well or not?
Well, our measure is around cope and recovery. So our measure is around that kind of those 9 categories of need and progress, from kind of an entry point to an exit point, and having a positive kind of progression on that. That's how we internally, from a service perspective, measure success. But in terms of comparing that to other areas, at the moment we've got a challenge in kind of doing that, and we're hoping that will come from a Ministry of Justice perspective in terms of sharing information.
So the figures you showed at the beginning about mental health needs.
It's such a varied landscape across the country that there wouldn't necessarily be a direct comparison.
No, not. I don't think there would be. And the sort of victims' needs assessment approach that Julia took at the beginning, not many PCs did, if any others, I don't think, to understand, right, this is what victims want, let's provide that service. It's just able what they have.
what it should give us is information, as you suggested, Elise, around how many victims are actually being supported through the service, and that will be something that's collected from every force area, and then how much is being spent from every force area. So you could do something that's, again, not to use, for want of a better phrase, quick and dirty, which gives you an indication of value for money.
It's an indicator, isn't it?
Yeah. And from a satisfaction or a survey perspective, that happens at the end of every victim's journey, and there are 3 core questions asked and a couple of additional kind of open-ended questions. That information is fed back into the service provider, and then it's used as part of the contract management process to try and continuously improve the service.
And it's just how we see that, isn't it?
Yeah, and at the moment, again, that is provided back to MOJ, but we have provided it here previously. We've had that information and we could bring it here again. Quite happy to do that.
Yeah, I always tell Jenny to bring less information normally.
No, and I don't, and it would just be interesting as a follow-on from today. I'm not asking for it now, but it would be interesting to get that as a follow-up to today. Can we have some data just to...
Yeah, and we've just done a Ministry of Justice return, so that would be easy to provide.
Can we make an action for the Chief to get that information, please?
Thank you.
Jenny, you can have 1 minute on your future slide, and then the case studies we will leave.
No, we'll do the case studies. I mean, it's relatively self-explanatory. Locally commissioned services based on local needs across victim and witness journey. We need to consider as to whether we want to do another victim needs assessment and when. Joined up services with one case management system. Again, this will be easier to navigate in terms of what services are people accessing. Are they accessing multiple services? What are they getting from those services? And what's the level of success, so it'll be easier to monitor and manage that. Broader support for families, especially those who are bereaved or were victims of life-changing injuries. So we've struggled around this in terms of what level of service to provide and how we get the information to supporting victims in order to be able to provide the service. So there's more that we need to do around that.
Some of those life-changing injuries, some of those could be mental health as well as physical
very
injury, couldn't they? When you think of some of the damage people as a result of some of the horrific crimes that take place.
And this is where fire could come in as well to a certain extent. So you will attend jobs that might not be a crime but fall into a similar category, be it fire or another road accident or something else entirely that might fit into that brief.
I was thinking of families of people being subject to child sexual abuse. You know, with the internet, crimes are escalating so significantly here in North Yorkshire. I was thinking of those type of offences where families are going to have to support their children through a long period of time with issues. You know, physical injuries are one thing, mental health issues are another, aren't they? When did we do the last needs assessment?
2014.
Yeah, and so crimes are changing so significantly, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, Jenny comes on to younger people.
So in terms of specific children and young people services, we are currently in the process of recommissioning our CSE service and looking to expand it to a vulnerable young people service. So that just means that we will be able to support more young people who are identified either by ourselves, through NYP colleagues, through fire colleagues, from other partner colleagues, where actually they might have a need in terms of cope and recovery. So that will be a really positive. So it will be an expanded service. We're currently working with county and city to, again, not necessarily co-commission, but make sure that we've got the service in place that makes sense from their safeguarding perspectives as well. So that's positive. More services commissioned locally. So as I said previously, currently a number of services are commissioned nationally, which means we have very little influence on what they are, what they look like, who goes into them from a local perspective, and we'd be very interested in having more services devolved to us locally.
The only thing I'd say to that is these offences such as modern slavery and terrorism are really low in number. But they're really high in specialism. And going back to, you haven't got specialists in terms of stalking, which is quite a significant issue. Locally commissioned services for supporting victims of terrorism might not be the right thing.
No, and I think what we're really interested to understand is more information about what North Yorkshire individuals get from the national services, because at the moment we don't get that information. So if we did, we might be able to make a kind of a comparison of what we might be able to provide locally and see whether we think it would compare.
They're just so specialist.
Yeah.
That would be my concern, of so specialist and so low in number, thank goodness, that it would take an immense amount of effort, wouldn't it, for terrorism related.
Yeah, and again, we might be able to look at doing some things regionally or something like that, so we might have a local, a more local service.
It's the flexibility of making the decision ourselves rather than having to go with a national service that may or may not be providing a good service. If they are, great, but it gives you the ability to look at it and assess it yourself.
And with that would come some devolved funding as well, which again would be positive. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Jane.
That's it.
That is item 4. Thank you both very much. That's really helpful and interesting. We're now on to the sort of regular monthly performance part of the meeting. We have theoretically 12/13 minutes left. It might be a few minutes over. If those, like the chief, you have to go because they've got another meeting, that's fine. But if at the same time as we canter through it, if we're a little bit over, if that's okay, that would be fine.
Okay, do I need to leave time for the questions at the end as well?
We haven't had any questions at the moment, so
right.
You've got a few extra minutes.
Okay, thank you. There is just short of 20 slides, so I am going to have to have a rather quick canter.
It's fine. There'll be some we focus on more than others, you know, as always.
Okay, the first slide really I'll bring to your attention but won't go to in too much detail. It's a slide on proactivity. So it shows that a proportion of the proactive policing units and how they spend their time. I've got to say that it does raise some questions really around things overlap. So dealing with border vulnerability, bearing in mind we're surrounded by 7 forces, a number of those have got high crime. It does overlap with serious and organised crime, although we measure it separately, there's those overlaps there. But what we're seeking to do is develop management information that shows how proactive we've been in terms of different units. You must remember that some of these units have got specific responsibilities on top of this. So the first one here, FSU, stands for Firearms Support Unit, and clearly we're deploying those units regularly in terms of firearms authorities, of which we do several authorities in terms of threat, harm and risk, but it does give us a flavour in terms of their proactivity.
So can I, given for firearms for example, they either seem to do border vulnerability or county lines. Does that mean they don't do anything in the City of York, or does it mean something happening in the City of York is cross-border and therefore it counts under border vulnerability?
We've got all sorts of serious and organised crime taking place in the City of York.
So that counts as border vulnerability because...
No, it counts as serious and organised crime.
Right, okay.
So that these are just the areas within the control strategy.
Yeah.
So if for example there's a requirement for them to go to a domestic or other incident within the city, they will still attend those.
Yeah.
These are just their task and returns against control strategy.
Right.
Yeah. So that I would expect the majority of their time to be taken up in deployments on firearms with authorities, and also they clearly have training responsibilities as well. In addition to that, and particularly over the summer months, they were deployed in regular incidents, and if they're the most appropriate and available resource, they'll go to those. In addition to that, they've got some time for proactivity, and this is the bit that we're trying to demonstrate.
I see, got it. So it's specifically
I would call
the proactive bit of the proactive team.
Yeah, I would call it developing management information. So we're starting to get more and more sophisticated in terms of measuring our demand and what activity is taking place.
So is the flip side of this information available, i.e. what they're not doing when they're not doing proactive work against the control strategy, they are responding to domestic abuse issues, or is that all recorded somewhere that...
Yeah, so Mark Bates is working on exactly that, being able to, Mark is heads up our Nexus team, looks at the types of demand placed upon each of our units. So, for instance, that the majority of their time should quite rightly be firearms authority type deployments.
Okay. And do we have any idea what proportion? So this is 1,751 hours, for example, for the FSU. How many hours they contribute in total?
I can get you that information. I haven't got
No, I wouldn't expect it, but that. Okay.
Yeah, but we do have all of that information. Where we are moving to, and we might perhaps move to that in the future here, is much more interactive. So when we run our operations board now, if questions like that come up, we're able to look straight away at those answers. But we're just trying to, unfortunately, bring a snapshot in time for the public.
Understood.
The next slide demonstrates our force control room. So this is initial contact at 999. The thing that I would say here is demand is not at its highest in October and November. And we do know that, but we can see exactly where our performance is. We have some peak times to come during the month of December, but it's not peak throughout December, if that makes sense. So Builders Friday and New Year's Eve, for instance, will be peak times for us that we do plan for. The next slide indeed is in relation to 101, which is very similar again. And the thing just to note here is we obviously have a company working with us at the moment in relation to how we can better improve in this area of business, and we're in the design phase at the moment of improvements that are going to be made in the future.
I know, so it's concerning to see speed of answer is still not reducing. It's been pretty stable actually. It normally is a bit more up and down than that. But calls presented in October and August are pretty similar. And the speed of answer is a bit slower. I mean, given we're now in the quieter time of year, do we hope to see? I mean, we ask this every month, I feel like, but
so there's an entire piece of work going on about national. It's quite interesting. I know the time's limited. Nationally, people are looking at our figures, going, "Wow, how do you do that?" Because it takes us an average of 10 minutes to answer the phone. So we're not quite sure whether we're measuring ourselves against the norm nationally. So what we need to do is a further piece of work of, okay, where do we sit nationally? And if this is good in comparison with national, if we want to be down to 1 minute based on the Buzz research saying people get fed up at 1 minute 5 seconds, how many staff will it take for you to achieve that target, if that's the target? And therefore, do we want to spend X amount of money answering them in that speed, or are we satisfied that the fact is everybody else is taking a lot longer to answer them than we are? That's not a good public service. If your public are saying, I want them answering in a minute, that's the public of North Yorkshire saying what they require from their police service. But then it's balancing the budget and the cost and the resources against what's acceptable.
Yes.
And I think as well, was, when we saw last month, we presented the figures in relation to 48% are answered in 5 seconds or less. So there's a trying to understand this data, and I do think that actually, if we're saying the public target is 1 minute and that's what we're going to do, even with the significant investment we've had into the force control room, we're still nowhere near. We're over double
as an average.
As an average.
Yeah, which is
away
what
from 1 minute. So I think in terms of that, actually, what is realistically within our budget, what is it that we can achieve, and how can we look at that? Because actually, if the public were aware that 48% of those 101s are answered in under 5 seconds, and pretty much 100% of our 999s are answered in under 10 seconds, which is the national target, then that's a fairly significant positive for our performance within the force control room.
We used to measure it in 90%, didn't we?
Yeah.
Over 90% needed to be answered in 10 seconds for 999, and I think it was 30 seconds for 199.
Yeah.
And some forces put in a switchboard, a physical person switchboard, and they answer the phone and they then say, well, I've hit the target. We have an electronic switchboard and we measure things differently. So these comparisons.
And we do it the right way, and it's not necessarily.
What gets done, and
there's a few things. Whilst it's really helpful to know where we stand nationally, so that's a piece of work that's worth doing. There is also there's that, and then separately is the investment that Julie's made in the control room doesn't seem to have had an impact on waiting times at all at the moment in the last couple of months.
Well, it has, in terms of it stabilised where we were with 999. So prior to that, we were dropping significant numbers of 999s or taking more than 2 minutes to answer the calls. That is no longer happening. So we have stabilised our performance in 999s, where it's significantly improved. The element for me where we're looking at our average speed of answer probably around 101s, is around about 2 minutes and 50 seconds, I think it would take in as an average. So I think the conversation that we're going to have is, actually, if you want to now take that to 1 minute, this is going to take an X amount of resources.
Yeah, it's not now, that has been the target for...
But what we're saying is, actually, if we're saying that our call handling is as efficient as we probably can make this at this moment in time, is that still the target that you want for the public of North Yorkshire? Or I would probably say is there's an ulterior option here of a staged target for answering time for 101. Because that's, if we said to the public we answer half of those calls in less than 10 seconds, which is equivalent of our 999s, then that's a significant improvement on where we are. But if we keep it where it is, I think we're not necessarily painting the picture that the public needs to see around it.
There's also, sorry, Will, I think there's also a further piece of work that we need to do on, are we spending time on the phone dealing with the right things, which I think is the work that's being done at the moment of, we're such a caring pro-social service, we know, don't we, that our call handlers are on the phone helping people who actually need the help of another agency. So are we also doing the right thing in terms of signposting to other agencies? And that's not about not delivering a service, but are we in an efficient way signposting on for the other agency to have a 5-minute chat with that person rather than keeping our call handlers on the phone? So I think the investment in people's been done. I think there is also work to do on what do we spend our time doing in the control room as a pro-social organisation.
Yeah, and given what was in the news recently about mental health, and I know calls in the control room aren't necessarily the same as what officers are doing on the ground, but you know there'll be a lot of similarity there. Are we necessarily doing the right thing on the phone? A lot of the time, I'm sure not, and there could be other people doing that. Nevertheless, despite lots of effort, and you know we're all in lots of the same meetings about this, lots of effort, lots of money, lots of resourcing, changing of efficiency, changing of processes to have crime recording done separately to people taking calls. None of that has reduced waiting times particularly. Yes, we've kept up, and you know if the number of calls presented is going up, I mean I don't know there compared to last year if it is up.
And that's, I think we need to see the comparison with before the investment started, because I think I think from memory the average speed of answer was a lot more challenging than that.
And we were dropping 9s.
6 months previous.
Yeah, so that's great, and I've got no qualm whatsoever that 999s come first, and that they've been stable at around 8 to 10 seconds for half a year now. But given all of the investment and time and effort that we've just been through is being put into 101, and we're not even treading, well, we're just about treading water. With loads of investment, what is the future going to hold if we can't keep those levels of investment?
Is the answer though that we need to see the trend data from before the investment to now, because we
might have hit a plateau of that's what you get for the investment unless you want to invest more. We don't know.
I know it's not been that long either since we did investment, but some of the work was kind of done slightly beforehand. I was slightly disappointed that we're not seeing that waiting time come down yet, given that's what we're focused on. We know the quality of service is generally really good. The service works really well in terms of the options and the operator at the end. The focus has been for a long time specifically waiting times, because the rest of it is really good, and the Buzz survey found the rest of it is really good. It's the waiting time that frustrates people.
This is the thing though, Will. It's not the waiting times for everybody that's running into 101. 48% again, the call answered in less than 5 seconds.
But if the average wait is almost 3 minutes, what that means, a lot of people are waiting double, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 minutes.
Right. So we need to understand what that true picture is, because actually, we may have to come back and say there is no way that we can hit 1 minute target time for 100% of people.
Yeah. But we haven't been told that yet.
Well, that's
the piece of work we need to do.
Yeah.
What's the formula between hitting that consistently, because that's a self-imposed target by us based on the Buzz doing a piece of research that says the public get fed up after 1 minute 5 seconds. So I think we need to understand the national picture. So if a control room elsewhere in the country with similar staffing is hitting an average of 5 minutes, we're doing quite well with the number of staff we've got, and I think we need to understand.
Sure, and I shouldn't name names, so I won't name the force. I'm sure one was an average of 10 minutes, not long ago.
There are several.
So I absolutely understand that, and the team in the control room are working really hard under lots of pressure. So everybody's doing all they can. I understand that. It's just from what I remember, and I can't remember the decision off the top of my head. Some of the investment was due to reduce waiting times, and that hasn't seemed to have happened. That's just a simple.
So the work that you're talking about is ongoing.
Yeah, of course, and it's early days, and I
appreciate
appreciate
all
that.
So we can get that through and then report that back into you.
Great. Yeah, if this is a quieter time of year, I know there were busy days ahead, clearly, but this, winter is quieter at the control room. So if it doesn't start reducing over winter, we'll get to the conversation we did last year, where summer's around the corner again, calls are going to go up, and that. So it's just looking at it now. Well, there should be a bit of space and time to be able to do that properly.
Yeah. So it is ongoing.
Yeah, I know it's ongoing. Okay.
Excuse me, I need to go to the meeting.
Please do. Anyone else who needs to have a floor?
I'm just going to try and, like I say, I've got nearly 20 slides to get through and we're already over time. The next few slides for the public to be able to see are our incident and crime data. It just starts to show now the total crimes being recorded in October, and it also shows the top 5 highest wards for committed crime. Interestingly, when I've gone through these figures, these are numbers of crimes rather than per thousand population, so I'm not sure it actually demonstrates the true impact on our rural communities who are more sparsely populated when we're just talking about numbers. So I'll just put that rider on it. And of course there's so many different ways to display statistical information. But, they're the next 3 slides. The next slide after that is in relation to mental health. Everybody will have seen the press release from HMIC, well, not everybody, but those who are interested, from HMIC over the last few days. What I would say about this is it's on the increase, it's challenging for us. The incidents linked to mental health range from dealing with somebody who's in crisis who gives us a ring, to somebody who is contemplating suicide, and we have to do suicide prevention tactics in terms of deploying negotiators over many hours. And then more worryingly for me, often now we are deploying firearms into mental health situations where people are threatening to self-harm with weapons and we've got no other choice. That for me is a really dangerous position to be in, and we are doing that regularly, and that's not necessarily captured in any of the data that is requested for
Can we capture it? Just in terms of sort of making that kind of case at a national level? I know HMIC have sort of done it for us, to be honest, but having those kinds of that kind of escalation, and one of the roadshows at Athena House, a negotiator was saying how much more often they're being called out for those kinds of things, which I think there is data of it, we don't see it, which is fine, but I think it is recorded somewhere that the number of deployments for those kinds of cases are up as well.
Yes. Yeah, so deployments are up, deployments linked to mental health is up. What we haven't done in the past, I think, is done the analysis around that, but I've been raising it both regionally and in force, so we can start and examine that in more detail.
Can we have an action to try and get that information? No rush, particularly if it comes to a separate meeting. That's fine.
I think if we ask for Mark Bates to have a look at that, I'm not sure it would be immediately, and it's probably something we'll take to Ops Board and have a look at it, and then have a conversation about how to bring it here. If that's okay. The other thing on the bottom left hand side is we have that focus, don't we, on the use of police custody. There's been consistently one person, and whilst we always try to have none, sometimes it's just that criteria of somebody's so violent or under the influence of drink or drugs that there isn't any other safer place to be in custody, but thankfully those cases are rare.
Am I right in thinking whenever that happens, they get specifically reviewed to make sure that was the right decision?
Absolutely, every one of them's looked at, yeah.
And I'm going to pick it with Jenny, but the York and Selby use of street triage seems to go up and down a lot. It's not something we can answer right now, but given Scarborough and York traditionally have very similar sort of detention rates, that it's a very big disparity in street triage use. I'll pick that up. So.
Okay, thank you.
So York is a staffing issue.
I know, but that had started to creep up again, because I think that began to be resolved and the staffing had increased again, because they were doing 2 jobs at once effectively, I think, from what I remember. So I presume that's now impacting again, but it's just understanding if that is a long-term problem now or not. That's what I'm getting at.
The next slide again focuses in on mental health in section 136. And the thing that I was going to draw to your attention on this one is the mode of transport. So we had 27 deployments in terms of transport. 20 of them were via ambulance, which I think is really good news. 6 in caged police vehicles and 1 in uncaged police vehicle, and that's probably more about...
I think that's the second month in a row we've had 75% ambulance, which is much better than we're used to. Whether that's crisis care concordat and subgroups and all that, those kind of things coming to bear, or shifting culture at ambulance, but it's good to see. And I know it's not ideal, but in North Yorkshire, inevitably we use police cars because often it is just in the best interest of the patient because of the geography, and an ambulance is so far away. Waiting is not an option, so we'll never, very rarely get to 100%. I would have thought.
The next slide, you'll see there that there's been a drugs increase. You know about the proactivity that we've done around county lines, which is drug-related organised crime groups. That's impacting both in terms of, therefore, increasing recorded incidents and crimes of drugs. So that's a positive indicator. And unfortunately, that's also impacting as we go through the figures in terms of violence, because clearly violence and exploitation comes with those type of offences. Weapons are on the increase, and I think that's really important in terms of officer numbers, officer safety, injury to the public, and that's something that we're going to need to keep monitoring.
Is theft from person linked to any of that, Amanda? Or is that
theft from
separate?
Person?
Gone up, and I don't remember it going up quite so heavily.
In terms of actual numbers, you've got 30% increase there. I can't answer without going away and doing some analysis in terms of what that is, but the theft from the person isn't linked to the more serious issues that we've got in terms of county lines, drugs, firearms offences, weapons offences.
It'd be interesting to know if there's any thoughts on that in particular. Okay. So I know a lot, you're right, I totally understand lots of that is related to lots of proactivity about county lines and dealing with that, but some of them won't be. And it's just if there's any...
I don't think the increase in weapons and violence is a result of proactivity. I think organised crime groups are impacting on us in terms of their violence, and therefore our recorded crime goes up. But each time that we have an interaction and we make an arrest linked to drugs, then we have to record drugs offences. Yeah. So if the arrests are focused in on the right people, then our drugs offences will quite rightly go up. So it's a positive indicator. The others are not.
No, I understand.
Indicators, the areas
I know it's all linked to county lines, but I know proactivities.
Yeah. The graphs here are from April to October. Each of the commanders have provided me with some detail that clearly we haven't got time to go into now, but I can do if required at some other point in time. What I can do is say that for each of the increases that are shown, I am reassured that either actions already taken place in terms of burglary offences over the summer that are now impacting on the figures because these are April to October, or more recent increases, and there's problem solving plans in place that each of the commanders have provided me with the detail of.
So in January, so there's no meeting next month, in January we'd like to see those numbers have come down. Burglary.
We'd like to see the numbers come down too.
But you're saying we've taken action, and I presume by that.
No, so some of the offences, some of the increases have occurred over the summer months. So Scarborough in particular had an offender who, 4 offenders who committed quite a few offences, so that impacted then over their figures that will still show over a 12-month period, because these are trends, aren't they, rather than month on month. But there is still active burglars out there, both in terms of dwellings and of course this captures in sheds, outhouses, etc. And there are problem solving plans in place for those. As to whether those figures will be reduced by January, I can't say, but what I can say is that the problem solving plans are in place and we're doing all that we can in order to counteract them. Some of it is linked to, if you remember the first slide around border vulnerabilities, the amount of activity that we're doing linked to our AMPR cameras and being really proactive with the people that are coming across the borders.
Well, I'm going to bring the thematic here in the early new year, I think, so we can discuss that in a bit more detail then. Look, can we... Just burglary's been an issue, I think, for a little while. I totally understand if it happened in summer, it still shows on these figures, so I understand we can't undo history. But can we have a month month by month breakdown for the last 6 months or so, just to see if it's consistent levels or if it is dropping off and we are just seeing a historical sort of blip in the summer that's just sticking with us?
Yeah, so in each of the areas it isn't a blip in the summer. So in Scarborough they've talked specifically about that blip in the summer months. In York they've deployed something quite different. We've got one person now as a burglary coordinator, and they've really focused in on their burglaries. That's coming down, but the superintendent there flags that whilst burglary reductions are coming down, violence is something that she's really concerned about, linked to an increase in domestic abuse, and the city has been particularly busy, particularly over the back end of the summer months. So each of the stories is quite different. I can go into it in detail, or we can provide you with...
Maybe outside the meeting.
If I provide you with the notes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
And similar story for this graph is very, very similar.
Yeah, I meant to say ASB's looking pretty good.
It is. What I would flag there is ASB is pretty good. There are still some concerns though around public safety and welfare, and then looking at that, I'm hoping it's correlating with the one I've got in front of me because I've got my glasses on. Hang on a sec. Yeah. Looking at this one, the things that I picked out in particular were burglary at Harrogate is up by 34%, burglary in Craven up by 26%, and some of those numbers are high as well. We're not just talking about small numbers with a big percentage increase. And Rydale again, another rural area, up by 21%, and then violence in York up by 31%. The commanders have provided me with the plans, which I can show you, so I can reassure you that, you know, we are doing all that we can and we've got plans in place, but they are those figures are concerning us.
Because we walked burglary here, so it was really helpful to get an understanding of how, you know, how it's what the problem-solving plans were at the time and how it's investigated and all those things. But practically understanding what it is sort of being done would be really helpful. So that would be great if we could do that outside the meeting.
We have an update then in relation to the Rural Task Force. I've met the Rural Task Force this afternoon, and there's going to be a really significant press release coming out from them. I don't want to steal their thunder, but tomorrow in relation to a real success they've had in terms of wildlife crime. I'm in the process of handing over the North Yorkshire Police National Portfolio for Wildlife Crime to Craig Naylor. I've got the final meeting with him in January. We've just ran our first wildlife crime course, which I opened last week. So really successful being able to... our wildlife crime officers are volunteers who do it on top of the day job. It's only right that we give them the training, and they'll also... It was a week-long course, and they'll also get some continuous professional development as well. Other significant developments under Upwellam, which is our engagement and prevention strategy in terms of rural crime. 150 new volunteers in terms of the rural watchers. I think that's really significant there. It shows the level of engagement, the level of passion within our communities as well to try and make a difference. We flagged two new organised crime groups in terms of rural crime, and I know from the meeting last week that there's some national organised crime groups being flagged for wildlife, and actually some of those are impacting here in North Yorkshire. So we're trying to tackle wildlife crime in an entirely different way now. We've reorganised ourselves to mirror the regional organised crime units, the ROCUs, so they're linked in to those in a different way now. We've held a National Day of Action. It was really successful. Again, it was talked about at the wildlife crime meeting. Other forces are starting to look at what we've done in terms of that, and we're reaching out to them to give them a bit of support.
Just getting back a touch, Amanda, can you let us know what... so we did... the chief used to have, when it was Dave, the National Lead for Wildlife Crime. Retired, that went sort of partly back into the NPCC pot, but Craig Naylor sort of kept hold of it as well.
No, I've kept the wildlife crime.
So, and you're keeping that?
No, I've kept it for now. I'm handing it over in January.
So will North Yorkshire have any involvement in the NPCC rural or wildlife crime?
Paula Booth is the silver for rural crime, and will still work to Craig Naylor in terms of rural crime.
So we don't have the lead, but we're involved in
We'll have no footprint in terms of wildlife crime, so I'll hand over the line management of the wildlife crime unit. But what we have got is I suppose from a legacy perspective, our local inspector is going to continue to chair the regional wildlife crime group and will therefore feed into the national picture.
And Paula retains her position.
The silver, she's the silver lead.
So she's a footprint, not necessarily at the top, but almost.
Absolutely.
She will be chairing meetings of the national leads who are the 6 priority areas.
Great, so we still have
she will be leading
strong
that group of implementation.
That's good.
Yeah. There's a couple more slides there. I suppose the highlights here are we've talked about our performance, we've talked about our demands. We are on track to recruit just short of the 1,400 target by March. We're operating at the moment on 1,350. I think that's really important to flag when we're talking about burglary increases, the other demands that we're talking about. We are doing more with less, and we're using our resources in a much more sophisticated and intelligent way than we've done in the past.
I should say there were confirmation this morning at Exec Board we will be at 1,400 by the end of the financial year.
Okay. It's also got on there our PCSOs. The target is 200 and we're at 190, just short of 195 at the moment. And the next slide is in terms of police staff. So it's decreased slightly from the previous month, but we do know that we're monitoring those vacancies really, really closely. And there's a final slide there from HR as well, which is just a summary slide. It also gives on that slide the actual numbers of specials and volunteers. 127 people are currently registered as specials, giving up their own time to come out and help us, and volunteers, including police cadets, we're at 290. Some really good news there, I think.
Yeah, Phil, I don't know if I'm best directing this question at you, but I think we discussed specials at one meeting recently, because we did a couple of years ago, we did a lot of work on specials and sort of reorganised it and things, and then I think it's probably for a good reason, because it's been working efficiently, but off the radar for a while, and just whether we're comfortable with the numbers and the type of specials that we see.
So we're looking at reorganising what skill sets we want from our special constabulary, so that work's being undertaken now by Alan Westcott and his team. So that's looking at bringing in specialist investigators, whether or not we're looking at support, bringing targeting NHS workers to help us support on the mental health work. So looking at skill set base, but we think actually around about 130 specials is probably the baseline for us to maintain, given recruitment that goes on, so it'll fluctuate around about 130. We think that's the number we should be able to maintain.
Okay, good.
And that concludes the presentation.
Thank you very much. Item 6, Simon, any questions? No. Vice versa, no. Quick one then. Any other business, anybody? No. Okay, there's no meeting in December, but there is in January. The focus is on older people. So we'll see you on the 29th of January at 1:30. Thank you.